The wind carried the sound of taps across Fort Knox Cemetery, each haunting note hanging in the crisp autumn air. Captain James Iron Hawkins stood motionless, his weathered hand raised in a final salute. 5 years had passed since Operation Desert Storm, but the memories remained as sharp as the shrapnel still embedded in his left leg. His dress uniform felt tight across his shoulders, a reminder of how time changes a man. Before him, 5 gravestones stood in perfect formation. Men who had served under his command, men who had died under his watch. Hawkins maintained his salute until the last note faded into silence. Only then did his arm lower, the movement accompanied by the familiar dull ache in his shoulder, another souvenir from the burning tank he dragged his men from. Not all of them, never all of them. They'd be proud to see you still standing, Jim. General Marshall approached from behind, his footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. At 65, Marshall remained as imposing as he'd been when Hawkins first served under him as a lieutenant. The general's face had weathered differently, creased less by age than by the weight of countless decisions made during 3 decades of military service. With respect, sir, I'd rather they were standing here instead of me, Hawkins replied. Marshall nodded, understanding the sentiment all too well. Walk with me, Captain. They moved away from the graves in silence, following a path that wound through the cemetery toward the administration buildings beyond. The general's driver waited at a respectful distance, standing beside a black sedan with government plates. How's the leg? Marshall asked. Same as always. Hurts when it rains. Hurts when it doesn't. Hawkins managed a thin smile. The doctors say I should be grateful. Most men don't walk away from what happened to the Thundercharger. The Thundercharger. Their tank. The memories flooded back unbidden. The heat of the Iraqi desert. The radio chatter. The sudden impact as the enemy round struck their position. The flames. The screams. His men trapped inside as he pulled them out one by one until the ammunition cooked off, throwing him 20 feet and peppering his body with shrapnel and burning metal. You saved 3 men that day, Jim. Never forget that. And lost 5 more, Hawkins countered. Sir, I appreciate the annual check-in, but if that's what this is about, it's not. Marshall stopped walking, turning to face his former subordinate. I need you, Captain. The Army needs you. Hawkins raised an eyebrow. I'm just a training officer now, sir. The Pentagon has plenty of decorated tank commanders. What we don't have is someone who understands both the machinery and the men who operate it. Marshall's voice dropped lower, his words meant for Hawkins alone. You've commanded tanks in combat. You've bled inside one. And you've spent the last 5 years teaching others how to survive what you endured. What exactly are you asking, sir? Marshall glanced toward his waiting car. Not here. I'm heading back to Washington tonight. There's room in the car if you want to hear the full briefing. Hawkins hesitated. His teaching duties at Fort Knox kept him busy, but the routine had become comfortable. Perhaps too comfortable. Since losing his wife Janet to cancer 3 years prior, the predictable rhythm of military instruction had become his refuge. The prospect of something new stirred a long-dormant sense of purpose. Let me grab my things, he said. 4 hours later, their plane touched down at Andrews Air Force Base. Throughout the flight, Marshall had remained deliberately vague, reviewing Hawkins' service record and asking pointed questions about tank warfare, crew dynamics, and the technical specifications of various armor configurations. By the time they arrived at the Pentagon, night had fallen, and the massive building loomed like a fortress against the Washington skyline. Marshall led Hawkins through a series of security checkpoints until they reached a conference room deep within the building's inner rings. Inside, a lone figure stood examining a large technical drawing pinned to the wall. The man turned as they entered, revealing a stern face dominated by bushy gray eyebrows and a perpetual scowl. Captain Hawkins, meet Colonel William Grayson, Marshall said. He's overseeing Project Sentinel. Sentinel? Hawkins repeated. The next generation of American battle tanks, Grayson explained, his voice clipped and efficient, designed to maintain our battlefield superiority for the next 20 years. Hawkins approached the technical drawing on the wall. It depicted a sleek, angular tank with a distinctly low profile. Even to his experienced eye, the design looked impressive, blending aggressive lines with practical considerations for battlefield survival. We're in the final development stage, Grayson continued. The prototype is operational, and we've begun preliminary testing. Production is scheduled to begin in 8 months. That's an aggressive timeline, Hawkins noted. The threat landscape doesn't allow us the luxury of traditional development cycles, Captain, Grayson replied. Our potential adversaries are advancing their armor capabilities. We need to stay ahead. Marshall gestured toward the conference table. Shall we sit, gentlemen? As they settled around the table, an aide entered with a stack of folders stamped with top secret in bold red letters. The aide distributed the materials and then departed, sealing the door behind him. Jim, Marshall began, what I'm about to share requires the highest level of clearance. Project Sentinel represents the most significant advancement in American tank technology since the Abrams. Hawkins opened his folder, scanning the technical specifications. The proposed tank boasted impressive numbers: a 120mm smoothbore main gun, advanced composite armor, a 1,500 horsepower turbine engine, and a sophisticated fire control system that promised unprecedented accuracy. Sentinel has been designed to be, and I quote from the project brief, superior in armor, armament, and power to anything previously produced, Marshall continued. It's faster than the Abrams while offering improved protection against modern anti-tank weapons. On paper, it looks remarkable, Hawkins acknowledged, but I still don't understand why I'm here. Marshall exchanged glances with Grayson before continuing. We need someone who understands tanks from the inside out, Jim, not just the mechanics, but the experience of commanding one in combat. Someone who can evaluate Sentinel from the perspective of the men whose lives will depend on it. With all due respect, General, Grayson interjected, we have an entire team of engineers and military consultants already assigned to this project. And how many of them have commanded a tank in actual combat, Colonel, Marshall countered? How many have survived a direct hit and dragged their men from the burning wreckage? He turned back to Hawkins. We need someone who understands what's at stake here. Someone who sees beyond the numbers and specifications to the human element. Hawkins closed the folder. What exactly would my role be? Special advisor to the Sentinel project, Marshall replied. You'd evaluate the prototype from a combat commander's perspective, focusing on crew survivability, battlefield effectiveness, and operational realities. We need this tank in production by next year, Captain, Grayson added. The schedule is non-negotiable. Hawkins caught the subtle tension between the two senior officers. Marshall wanted the best tank possible, regardless of timeline. Grayson seemed more concerned with meeting production deadlines than addressing potential flaws. I'd need full access to all test data and design specifications, Hawkins said, and the authority to recommend changes if necessary. You'll have access to everything you need, Marshall assured him. As for changes, he glanced at Grayson. Any substantive recommendations would need to be evaluated against our production timeline. In other words, don't expect to redesign the tank from scratch, Grayson clarified, his tone making clear his skepticism about Hawkins' involvement. Hawkins studied both men, weighing the opportunity before him. His current role training new tank commanders was important, but this was a chance to influence the future of American armored warfare, to ensure the next generation of tanks offered the protection his own crew had lacked. When do I start? He asked. Immediately, Marshall replied. You'll be temporarily reassigned to the Pentagon with full security clearance for the Sentinel project. Colonel Grayson will brief you on the current testing schedule tomorrow morning. Report to my office at 0700, Grayson said, rising from his chair. I'll have an aide show you to your temporary quarters. After Grayson departed, Marshall lingered. He's under enormous pressure from above, Jim. The Defense Department wants Sentinel operational as soon as possible. I understand tight schedules, sir, but rush development costs lives. I've seen it firsthand. Marshall nodded solemnly. That's exactly why you're here, Captain. Don't let the bureaucracy steamroll you. If you see problems, I expect you to raise hell. Yes, sir. Hawkins spent a restless night reviewing the Sentinel documentation. The design incorporated lessons learned from Desert Storm, but several elements concerned him. The proposed armor configuration seemed to prioritize weight reduction over maximum protection, particularly around the turret's frontal arc, the most likely impact point for enemy fire. At precisely 0700 this next morning, he reported to Grayson's office, armed with questions and concerns. The colonel's administrative assistant, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s, ushered him into an office dominated by models of various military vehicles, including a prototype of the Sentinel tank. Grayson sat behind a massive desk, reviewing documents on a computer screen. Captain Hawkins, you're punctual. I appreciate that. He gestured toward a chair. Please sit. We have much to cover. For the next hour, Grayson outlined the Sentinel's development history, from initial concept studies to the current testing phase. The project had advanced remarkably quickly, moving from design to prototype in just 18 months. We've conducted preliminary mobility tests and armor evaluations, Grayson explained. The results have been promising, though we've had to make certain compromises to meet our weight and production requirements. I noticed that in the specifications, Hawkins said. The frontal turret armor seems thinner than I'd expect for a next-generation tank. Grayson's expression tightened. The armor composition is classified beyond even your current clearance level, Captain. It's a new composite material that offers superior protection at reduced thickness. I'd like to see the test results in due time. For now, I want you to understand that Sentinel represents the culmination of years of research and development. We're not looking to reinvent the wheel at this late stage. With respect, Colonel, if there are vulnerabilities in the design, now is precisely the time to address them before the tank enters production. Grayson leaned forward. Let me be clear, Captain. Your role is advisory only. You've been brought in to provide a commander's perspective on an already approved design. The fundamental architecture of Sentinel is set. Then why am I here? Hawkins asked bluntly. Because General Marshall insisted, and he outranks me, Grayson replied with equal frankness. Now, if you're finished questioning the parameters of your assignment, I'd like to introduce you to the rest of the team. Grayson led Hawkins to a large conference room where a dozen people waited around a table, strewn with technical drawings and computer printouts. Most wore civilian clothes, likely contractors and engineers, though a few military uniforms were visible among the group. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain James Hawkins, Grayson announced. He'll be joining us as a special advisor on crew operations and combat effectiveness. Captain Hawkins commanded tanks during Desert Storm and has extensive experience in armored warfare. Hawkins scanned the faces around the table, noting a mix of curiosity and mild skepticism. One face in particular caught his attention, a young woman in a lieutenant's uniform, studying him with unusual intensity. I'll leave you to get acquainted, Grayson said. We have a demonstration of the prototype scheduled for 1400 hours at the Aberdeen testing grounds. Transportation will depart at noon. With that, the colonel departed, leaving Hawkins to navigate the introduction on his own. A heavy-set civilian in a rumpled suit approached first, extending his hand. Raymond Thompson, Velocity Dynamics. My company provides the Liberty engine system for Sentinel. Hawkins shook his hand. The Liberty? Isn't that based on a 30-year-old design? Thompson's smile tightened. Modified and enhanced, of course. It offers reliable performance at a fraction of the development cost of an entirely new power plant. And at twice the maintenance requirements of modern alternatives, a new voice interjected. Hawkins turned to find the young lieutenant at his elbow. She was shorter than he'd first realized, perhaps 5'4", with intelligent eyes and short-cropped brown hair conforming to military regulations. Lieutenant Sarah Winters, Armor Systems Integration, she introduced herself. It's an honor to meet you, Captain Hawkins. Lieutenant, he acknowledged with a nod. You have concerns about the engine choice? Among other things, she replied, glancing at Thompson. But we've been assured that budget considerations take precedence over optimal performance. Thompson's face flushed. The Liberty engine meets or exceeds all operational requirements for the Sentinel platform. Its proven reliability in extreme conditions makes it the logical choice. Its fuel consumption makes it a logistics nightmare, Winters countered, and the heat signature is substantially higher than newer alternatives. Perhaps we should continue this discussion another time, Thompson suggested stiffly. I have a conference call scheduled with our engineering team. He nodded curtly to Hawkins before retreating from the room. You've made a friend there, Hawkins observed wryly. Winters shrugged. Mr. Thompson represents a corporate interest, not the soldiers who'll depend on Sentinel for their survival. Sometimes he needs reminding of that distinction. And you're concerned about more than just the engine? Follow me, Captain. There's something you should see. Winters led Hawkins to a smaller adjoining room dominated by a large computer workstation. She closed the door behind them before accessing a secure database. What I'm about to show you isn't classified, but it's been de-emphasized in the official presentations. The monitor displayed detailed cross-sections of the Sentinel's armor configuration with specific measurements and material compositions. Hawkins studied the diagrams with growing concern. The frontal turret armor, he noted, it's only 76 millimeters thick at the thickest point, with a composite layer that supposedly compensates for the reduced thickness, Winters confirmed. But our latest tests suggest the composite doesn't perform as well against shape charges as initially projected, meaning it could be penetrated by modern anti-tank weapons. Exactly. Winters lowered her voice. I've raised this concern repeatedly, but Colonel Grayson insists we're within acceptable parameters. He says we can't afford the weight penalty of additional armor without compromising mobility. There's always a compromise, Hawkins acknowledged, but crew survivability should be the priority. That's what I've been saying. Winters paused, studying him intently. You were in Desert Storm, the 3rd Armored Division, right? That's right. How did you know? My father served in the same division. Sergeant David Winters. He was a tank commander with the 1st Battalion. The name struck Hawkins like a physical blow. David Winters. He saw the man's face clearly in his memory. Steady, reliable, with the same intelligent eyes as his daughter. The sergeant had been part of the relief force that reached Hawkins' position after the Thunder Charger was hit. I knew your father, Hawkins said quietly. He was a good soldier, one of the best. He never came home, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. His tank was hit 2 days before the ceasefire. I was 14. Hawkins felt the familiar guilt twist inside him. He'd survived while better men had fallen. I'm sorry, I didn't know. There's no reason you would. She straightened, visibly composing herself. But it's why I'm here, Captain. It's why I became an armor specialist. I don't want other daughters to lose their fathers because we cut corners on protection. Before Hawkins could respond, the door opened and Grayson appeared. There you are. I need both of you in the main conference room. We've moved up the departure for Aberdeen. The demonstration at Aberdeen Proving Ground proceeded without Hawkins having a chance to continue his conversation with Lieutenant Winters. They traveled separately, with Winters accompanying the engineering team, while Hawkins rode with Grayson and several senior officials from the Defense Department. Aberdeen's sprawling test facilities had evaluated American military vehicles since World War I. Today, the focus was entirely on Sentinel. As their convoy approached the test area, Hawkins caught his first glimpse of the prototype in motion, maneuvering through an obstacle course with impressive agility for a vehicle of its size. The tank's low profile and angular surfaces gave it a predatory appearance, distinctly different from the boxier Abrams. Its 120mm main gun tracked smoothly as the gunner engaged simulated targets, the stabilization systems maintaining accuracy despite the tank's movement across rough terrain. Impressive, one of the Defense Department officials remarked. The mobility exceeds expectations. And the fire control system allows for accurate targeting on the move at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters, Grayson added proudly. Sentinel represents a quantum leap in battlefield capabilities. Hawkins watched the demonstration with a professional eye, noting both the tank's strengths and potential vulnerabilities. Its speed and maneuverability were indeed exceptional, but he couldn't shake his concerns about the armor protection, particularly after seeing Winters' data. After the mobility demonstration, they proceeded to a firing range where the Sentinel would demonstrate its main gun capabilities. Hawkins seized the opportunity to approach Winters, who stood reviewing data on a tablet computer. What do you think so far? He asked quietly. The performance metrics are solid, she acknowledged, but we haven't tested the armor against realistic threats yet. When is that scheduled? It's not, at least not with actual anti-tank rounds. They're using computer simulations instead of live fire testing for the armor evaluation. Hawkins frowned. That's not standard protocol. It is when you're trying to fast-track development and avoid potentially embarrassing test failures, Winters replied. Look, Captain, I shouldn't be saying this, but there are serious concerns about the armor configuration that aren't being addressed. The composite material works in theory, but we haven't validated it against modern penetrators. Their conversation was interrupted as the Sentinel fired its main gun, the thunderous report echoing across the range. The target, a decommissioned Soviet-era tank positioned at 2,500 meters, erupted as the round struck with pinpoint accuracy. Direct hit, Grayson announced triumphantly. Gentlemen, that's the future of American armored warfare. The officials applauded, clearly impressed by the demonstration. Hawkins, however, remained troubled. Firepower without adequate protection was a fatal equation, one he'd witnessed firsthand in Desert Storm. The remainder of the demonstration showcased the Sentinel's advanced features, its thermal imaging systems, remote weapon station, and enhanced communications array. Throughout it all, Hawkins observed with growing certainty that while the tank represented significant advancements in many areas, its armor protection remained a critical vulnerability. As the officials prepared to return to Washington, Hawkins approached Grayson. Colonel, I need to see the complete armor test data, including any simulations of shaped charge impacts on the turret face. Grayson's expression hardened. That information is compartmentalized, Captain. I'll have to clear your access with the project security officer. General Marshall assured me I'd have complete access to all test data, and you will, through the proper channels. Submit your request in writing, and I'll expedite it through the system. Bureaucratic stonewalling, Hawkins recognized, a tactic to delay and frustrate inquiry. Colonel, if there are known vulnerabilities in the armor design, they need to be addressed before Sentinel enters production. Captain, let me be perfectly clear, Grayson said, lowering his voice. Sentinel will enter production on schedule. The investment is too substantial and the strategic need too urgent to allow last-minute design changes based on theoretical concerns. Soldiers' lives aren't theoretical, Colonel. Neither are threats to national security, Captain. Every day we delay Sentinel's deployment is a day our forces operate with outdated equipment. There are always risks in combat. Our job is to minimize them while meeting operational requirements. Their conversation was interrupted as Thompson approached, accompanied by a uniformed officer Hawkins hadn't met. Colonel Grayson, our transport is ready. Shall we depart? Yes, of course. Grayson turned back to Hawkins. We'll continue this discussion in Washington, Captain. In the meantime, I suggest you focus on crew operations and tactical employment rather than second-guessing our engineering decisions. As Grayson walked away with Thompson, Hawkins felt a presence at his shoulder. Lieutenant Winters had rejoined him, her expression troubled. He won't show you the data, she said quietly. Not the real data, anyway. Why, what are they hiding? Come with me. Not now, tonight. My quarters, 2100 hours. I have something you need to see. Before Hawkins could respond, she moved away, rejoining her engineering colleagues as they packed up their equipment. Whatever Winters wanted to share, she clearly feared being overheard. The return journey to Washington passed in tense silence. Hawkins reviewed his observations of the Sentinel demonstration, comparing them against his combat experience. The tank's mobility and firepower were indeed impressive. But if its armor couldn't withstand modern anti-tank weapons, those advantages would mean little in actual combat. That evening, after a perfunctory dinner in the Pentagon's cafeteria, Hawkins made his way to the temporary officers' quarters where Lieutenant Winters was billeted. The hallways were nearly deserted, most officers having returned home for the evening or still working late in their offices. Winters answered his knock immediately, as though she'd been waiting by the door. Her quarters were Spartan but meticulously organized, with technical manuals and engineering textbooks stacked neatly on a small desk. Thank you for coming, Captain, she said, gesturing him inside. I apologize for the cloak and dagger approach, but what I'm about to show you could end my career if Colonel Grayson discovers I've shared it. Then maybe you shouldn't, Hawkins suggested. I don't want to put your position at risk. My father died because someone decided adequate armor was too expensive, she replied firmly. I won't let that happen again. She retrieved a laptop computer from her desk drawer and powered it on. After entering a complex password, she opened a folder labeled Personal Research that contained dozens of technical documents. These are the actual test results from the armor trials, she explained, not the sanitized versions presented to the Oversight Committee. Hawkins leaned closer, examining the data. The documents detailed extensive tests of the Sentinel's composite armor against various threat profiles, including shaped charges and kinetic penetrators similar to those used by potential adversaries. According to this, the frontal turret armor failed against the RPG-29 analog, he noted, pointing to a particularly damning result, and against the latest Russian 125mm APF-SDS rounds, Winters confirmed. The composite material performs well against older threats, but modern anti-tank weapons would penetrate with catastrophic results for the crew. Has Grayson seen these results? He signed off on them personally. Winters opened another document displaying Grayson's electronic signature on the test report, but the official presentation to the Defense Department omitted these failures, focusing only on successful tests against outdated threat profiles. Hawkins felt a cold anger building inside him. They're deliberately concealing critical vulnerabilities. It gets worse, Winters continued, opening another file. This is a classified intelligence assessment of anti-tank weapons deployed during Desert Storm. It specifically documents multiple cases where American tanks were penetrated by weapons that are significantly less capable than what we're facing now. Hawkins stared at this document, recognizing immediately what he was seeing. The report detailed the exact type of impact that had destroyed the Thundercharger, killing 5 of his crew. The description matched his experience with eerie precision. Penetration of the turret face, catastrophic ammunition cook-off, and fatal injuries to crew members in the path of the spalling. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice tight. "It was buried in the project archives. I found it while researching historical armor vulnerabilities." Winters hesitated before continuing. "Captain, one of the case studies in this report, it's about your tank, isn't it? The Thundercharger?" Hawkins closed his eyes briefly, the memories flooding back. The heat, the smoke, the screams of dying men. "Yes. I'm sorry," she said quietly. "But this report proves that Grayson knew about these vulnerabilities from the beginning. He specifically requested this intelligence assessment 2 years ago when Sentinel's development began. And he's ignored the findings. Worse than that, he's designed a tank with the same vulnerabilities, only now facing even more lethal weapons." Winters closed the laptop. "Captain, Sentinel is currently designed as a death trap. If it enters service without addressing these armored deficiencies, we'll lose crews in any serious engagement." Hawkins stood, pacing the small room as he processed what he'd learned. The implications were staggering. Grayson and his team were knowingly fielding a tank with fatal flaws, prioritizing production schedules over crew survival. "We need to take this up the chain of command," he said finally. "General Marshall needs to see these results." "Grayson reports directly to the Assistant Secretary of Defense," Winters pointed out. "He has political protection. Even Marshall might not be able to intervene effectively, especially with production contracts already signed." "Then what do you suggest? We can't just let this happen." Winters hesitated. "There might be another option, a technical solution rather than a political one." "I'm listening." "I've been working on an alternative armor configuration, a modified composite layering that would provide significantly improved protection without substantially increasing weight or altering the tank's external dimensions." "Have you tested it?" "Only in simulations so far, but the results are promising. With proper funding and authorization, we could develop and test a prototype within weeks." Hawkins considered the proposal. "Grayson would never approve it. Not through official channels, no. But if we could demonstrate a viable alternative with concrete test results rather than just theoretical objections, it would be harder to ignore." "You're talking about an unauthorized development project." "I'm talking about saving lives, Captain." Winter's expression was resolute. "Isn't that why you're here?" Before Hawkins could respond, his phone vibrated with an incoming message. It was from an unknown number, the text brief and unexpected. "Need to see you, Aberdeen Motor Pool. 0600 tomorrow, an old friend." "Something wrong?" Winters asked, noting his expression. "I'm not sure," Hawkins replied, showing her the message. "Someone wants to meet me at Aberdeen tomorrow morning." "Could be a setup," she suggested. "Grayson might suspect I've contacted you. Or it could be someone else with concerns about Sentinel." Hawkins made his decision. "I'll go, but I'll be careful. In the meantime, continue developing your alternative armor design. Don't do anything official yet, but get it ready for testing. And if we can prove it works, then we'll force Grayson to listen, one way or another." Hawkins left Winters' quarters shortly afterward, his mind racing with what he'd learned. The Sentinel project was compromised at its foundation, built on deception and political expediency rather than sound engineering and combat realities. The parallels to his own experience in Desert Storm were too stark to ignore. Different decades, same mistakes, with soldiers' lives hanging in the balance. He spent a restless night reviewing the information Winters had shared, searching for options that wouldn't immediately end both their careers. By morning, he'd reached a decision. He would investigate further, gathering evidence that even Grayson's political allies couldn't ignore, while supporting Winters' alternative armor design as a viable solution. Dawn was breaking as Hawkins arrived at Aberdeen's motor pool, the massive vehicle maintenance facility just stirring to life. A few mechanics were already at work, preparing tanks and other vehicles for the day's testing schedule. Hawkins moved cautiously through the building, alert for any sign of who might have summoned him. He found his answer near the back of the facility, where a solitary figure in army fatigues stood examining a disassembled tank engine. The man was broad-shouldered and powerfully built, his dark hair now flecked with gray, but Hawkins recognized him immediately. "Rodriguez," he said, a smile breaking across his face for the first time in days. Master Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez turned, his weathered face creasing into a grin. "Captain Hawkins. Still walking with that limp, I see." "Still complaining about Army coffee, I bet," Hawkins returned, clasping his old gunner's hand in a firm grip. "What are you doing here? Last I heard you were instructing at Fort Benning." "Got transferred to Aberdeen 6 months ago. I'm training gunners for the Sentinel program." Rodriguez glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "But that's not why I asked you here." "I figured as much. What's going on?" "Rumors at first, concerns about the tank's protection levels. But last week I saw the classified test results." Rodriguez's expression darkened. "They're sending us into battle with inadequate armor, Captain. Again." "I know," Hawkins confirmed. "I've seen the data too." "Then you understand what this means. The Sentinel turret won't withstand a direct hit from current generation anti-tank weapons. We'd lose the entire crew." Rodriguez shook his head in disgust. "I've been training these kids for months, teaching them to trust their equipment. Now I find out I'm preparing them for slaughter." "We're working on a solution," Hawkins assured him. "Lieutenant Winters in the engineering team has designed an alternative armor configuration that could address the vulnerability." "Sarah Winters, David's daughter?" Rodriguez asked, surprise evident in his voice. "You knew her father?" "We all did, sir. Sergeant Winters was with the relief column that reached us after the Thundercharger was hit. He's the one who helped me pull you out of the wreckage before the ammo cooked off." Rodriguez's voice grew quiet. 2 days later, his own tank took a hit in almost the same spot. None of them made it out. The revelation hit Hawkins like a physical blow. David Winters had helped save his life, only to die in similar circumstances days later. And now his daughter was fighting to prevent history from repeating itself with a new generation of tanks and crews. "I didn't know," Hawkins admitted. "She told me her father died in Desert Storm, but not that he was there that day." "She probably doesn't know the connection," Rodriguez suggested. "The after-action reports were classified, but it makes sense now why she became an armor specialist. She's developed a potential solution, but Grayson won't listen. The production schedule takes priority over everything else." "Then we make him listen," Rodriguez said firmly. "I've got 30 gunners in training for Sentinel, Captain. Young men and women who are counting on that armor to keep them alive. I won't send them out in a death trap." "What are you proposing?" "I've got access to the firing range and test facilities. If Lieutenant Winters has a better armor design, I can help test it off the books if necessary." Hawkins considered the offer. With Rodriguez's assistance, they could conduct actual physical tests rather than relying solely on simulations. But unauthorized testing of classified military hardware carried severe penalties. "That's a serious risk to your career, Sergeant." "With respect, sir, my career means nothing compared to those kids' lives." Rodriguez's expression was resolute. "I've buried enough friends. I won't add my trainees to the list because some pencil pusher wanted to meet a production deadline." Hawkins nodded slowly. "All right, let me talk to Winters, see what she needs to move forward with testing. But we keep this between us for now. If Grayson gets wind of what we're doing, he'll shut us down immediately." "Understood, sir." Rodriguez checked his watch. "I need to get to the training range. My class starts in 20 minutes. Call me when you have a plan." As Rodriguez departed, Hawkins felt a renewed sense of purpose. With the experienced gunner on their side, they had a realistic chance of validating Winters' alternative design. The challenge would be conducting the tests without alerting Grayson or his allies within the project. Returning to Washington, Hawkins reported to Grayson's office for his scheduled briefing on crew operations. The colonel was reviewing documents when Hawkins entered, barely acknowledging his presence with a curt nod. "Captain, your report on yesterday's demonstration?" "The mobility and firepower are impressive," Hawkins began, choosing his words carefully. "The fire control system in particular represents a significant advancement over current platforms." "But," Grayson prompted, detecting the reservation in Hawkins' tone, "but I remain concerned about the armor protection, particularly for the turret face and frontal arc. Modern anti-tank weapons would present a serious threat to the crew." Grayson set down his pen with deliberate control. "We've been through this, Captain. The armor configuration represents the optimal balance between protection and mobility. No tank is invulnerable." "I understand that, Colonel, but according to the test data, Sentinel's frontal armor would be penetrated by weapons already in service with potential adversaries. That's not an acceptable risk." "And where exactly did you review this test data?" Grayson asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Hawkins maintained eye contact, refusing to implicate Winters. "As General Marshall's designated advisor, I have a responsibility to thoroughly evaluate all aspects of the Sentinel design. You have a responsibility to follow the chain of command and respect project security protocols, Grayson countered. If you have concerns, raise them through proper channels. Don't go poking around in classified data without authorization. My authorization comes from General Marshall, Colonel, and my concerns are valid. Grayson leaned back in his chair, studying Hawkins with cold calculation. Let me be very clear, Captain. The Sentinel project represents $1 billion investment. Production contracts have been signed. Materials have been procured. Training programs are underway. We are not going to halt or delay this critical national security initiative because you have theoretical concerns about armor protection. They're not theoretical, Hawkins insisted. The test results show clear vulnerabilities. Tests conducted under specific, controlled conditions that may not reflect actual combat scenarios, Grayson dismissed. Every weapon system involves compromise, Captain. You know that as well as anyone. I also know what happens when those compromises fail in combat. I've pulled men from burning tanks, Colonel. I've written letters to their families explaining why they won't be coming home. Don't lecture me about sacrifice, Hawkins, Grayson snapped, his composure cracking momentarily. I've been serving this country since before you earned your commission. The decisions I make are based on strategic necessities that extend far beyond individual tanks or crews. No strategic necessity justifies knowingly deploying vulnerable equipment when alternatives exist, Hawkins replied, his own anger rising. Lieutenant Winters has developed a modified armor configuration that could address these vulnerabilities without significantly impacting weight or production schedules. Grayson's eyes narrowed. Lieutenant Winters? So that's where you got your information. I should have known she'd continue pushing her pet theories despite clear directives to focus on the approved design. Her pet theories are based on sound engineering and combat realities, Colonel. At the very least, they deserve proper evaluation. What they deserve is irrelevant, Grayson said coldly. Lieutenant Winters has been instructed repeatedly to work within established parameters. If she can't follow orders, perhaps she should be reassigned to a position more suited to her limited perspective. The threat was unmistakable. Grayson was prepared to derail Winters' career to protect the Sentinel program as currently designed. Hawkins realized he needed to de-escalate the situation before he made things worse for their nascent resistance. Colonel, we all want Sentinel to succeed, he said, moderating his tone. My concerns come from wanting to ensure it provides our troops with the best possible protection. Surely that's a goal we share. Grayson regarded him for a long moment before responding. Your dedication to the troops is commendable, Captain, but in this context, it's also myopic. Sentinel represents a comprehensive weapon system designed for the modern battlefield. Individual components must be evaluated in that larger context. I understand that, sir. I'm simply suggesting that the armor configuration deserves additional review before we commit to production. Your suggestion is noted, Grayson said dismissively. Now, if there's nothing else, I have a meeting with the production contractors in 15 minutes. Recognizing the dismissal, Hawkins nodded stiffly. Thank you for your time, Colonel. As he left Grayson's office, Hawkins knew he'd accomplished nothing except alerting the Colonel to their concerns and potentially putting Winters in the crosshairs. They would need to proceed more carefully, building their case methodically before confronting Grayson again. In the corridor, he nearly collided with Thompson, who was approaching Grayson's office with a thick folder of documents. The engine contractor gave him a cold nod of recognition. Captain Hawkins, I understand you've been raising concerns about the Sentinel design. Just doing my job, Mr. Thompson, ensuring our troops have equipment they can rely on. A noble sentiment, Thompson replied with a thin smile. Though I wonder if your personal experiences might be coloring your professional judgment. Not every tank will meet the same fate as the Thunder Charger. The casual reference to Hawkins' traumatic experience struck like a calculated blow. Thompson clearly knew his history and was using it as a weapon, suggesting his concerns stemmed from psychological scars rather than legitimate engineering issues. My experiences inform my judgment, Mr. Thompson. They don't distort it. Hawkins maintained his composure with effort. Perhaps if more decision-makers had first-hand knowledge of combat realities, we'd build better equipment from the start. Perhaps, Thompson conceded without sincerity, but the reality is that defense acquisition involves necessary compromises between ideal specifications and practical constraints. Colonel Grayson understands this balance. I hope you will too. With that, Thompson continued to Grayson's office, leaving Hawkins seething in the corridor. The encounter confirmed what he'd already suspected. Thompson and Grayson were aligned in their determination to maintain the Sentinel program as currently designed, regardless of the armor vulnerabilities. Hawkins made his way to a secure phone, calling the number Rodriguez had given him earlier. When the sergeant answered, Hawkins kept his message deliberately vague. "I need to schedule that technical review we discussed. Is the training facility available this weekend?" "Affirmative," Rodriguez replied, understanding the subtext. "Saturday night after 2,000 hours. The range will be clear." "Good. I'll bring the technical specialist and the necessary equipment." After ending the call, Hawkins sought out Lieutenant Winters, finding her in the engineering lab, working alone at her computer terminal. She looked up as he approached, her expression questioning. "Grayson knows," he said without preamble. "I didn't mention you specifically, but he figured it out." Winters nodded, unsurprised. "He called me in this morning, warned me to focus on authorized project activities or face reassignment. He knows I showed you the test results." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put your position at risk." "You didn't. I knew the risks when I decided to share that information." She glanced around the empty lab before continuing in a lowered voice. "Did you meet your old friend at Aberdeen?" "Yes, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, my former gunner. He's training crews for Sentinel now." Hawkins leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's offered to help us test your modified armor design. Off the books. He has access to the range facilities after hours." Winter's eyes widened. "Actual physical testing? That would be incredible, but also incredibly risky. For all of us," Hawkins acknowledged, "but if we can demonstrate that your design works, it would be much harder for Grayson to ignore. I'd need materials, fabrication equipment, and I'd need to physically transport the prototype armor sections to Aberdeen without being detected. Can you do it?" Winters considered for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Yes, I have contacts at the metallurgy lab who might help. No questions asked. And I can disguise the components as standard test articles for routine evaluation." "Good. Rodriguez can give us access to the range this Saturday night. We'll need to work quickly and leave no trace of our activities." "I'll be ready," Winters promised. "But Captain, you should know something about my father." "Rodriguez told me," Hawkins said gently. "He was there the day the Thundercharger was hit. He helped pull me from the wreckage." Winters' expression revealed complex emotions: surprise, sorrow, and a flicker of something like vindication. "Then you understand why this matters so much to me. My father died because someone decided adequate armor was too expensive or too heavy. History is repeating itself with Sentinel." "Not if we can help it," Hawkins assured her. "We'll find a way to fix this, Lieutenant, whatever it takes." As they finalized their plans for the unauthorized testing, neither noticed the small security camera mounted in the corner of the lab, its lens focused directly on their position. Nor did they see the figure watching the security feed in a separate room, observing their conversation with cold calculation. Raymond Thompson switched off the monitor, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. Captain Hawkins and Lieutenant Winters had just provided him with exactly the ammunition he needed to protect his company's lucrative contract with the Sentinel program. By Saturday night, their little rebellion would be crushed, and the Sentinel would proceed to production exactly as designed, with Thompson's Liberty engines at its heart, regardless of how many soldiers might die as a result. The Pentagon's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the classified documents spread before Hawkins. 3 days had passed since his confrontation with Colonel Grayson, and in that time he'd immersed himself in every technical specification and test report he could access. The evidence mounted with each page. Sentinel's armor was dangerously inadequate against modern threats. Outside the secure reading room, the quarters hummed with the routine business of America's military headquarters. Inside, Hawkins fought a private war against time and bureaucracy, searching for the leverage needed to force a design change before production began. His phone vibrated. A text from Lieutenant Winters. "Materials secured, still on for Saturday." Hawkins deleted the message immediately. They couldn't risk leaving electronic traces of their plan to conduct unauthorized testing at Aberdeen. Too many careers hung in the balance, including his own. But more importantly, the lives of future tank crews depended on their success. He gathered the documents and returned them to the security officer and then made his way to the cafeteria where he'd arranged to meet Rodriguez. The sergeant was already there, nursing a cup of coffee at a corner table far from the main traffic flow. "Captain," Rodriguez acknowledged with a nod as Hawkins sat down. "How's the research going?" "I've confirmed what we already knew," Hawkins replied quietly. The armor won't withstand modern anti-tank weapons. And I found something else, something worse. Rodriguez leaned forward, his weathered face tense. What? Grayson has been suppressing armor penetration data from Desert Storm. The Thunder Charger wasn't an isolated incident. At least 7 other tanks suffered catastrophic penetrations from weapons that are primitive compared to what's available now. Son of a bitch, Rodriguez muttered. He's known all along. It gets worse. I traced the design compromise to a budget decision made 3 years ago. They reduced the armor thickness to accommodate Thompson's Liberty engine, which is heavier than the alternative power plant. So they sacrificed protection to use an overweight, outdated engine. Why? Politics and money, Hawkins replied grimly. Thompson's company employs thousands of workers in 3 congressional districts. The contract is worth billions over the projected life cycle. Rodriguez shook his head in disgust. And Grayson's signing off on this? He's following orders from above. The Assistant Secretary of Defense personally approved the design compromise. The sergeant's hands tightened around his coffee cup. What's Lieutenant Winter's alternative look like? A modified composite layering system that increases protection without significantly changing the weight distribution. She's brilliant, Rodriguez. If anyone can solve this problem, she can. She'll need to, Rodriguez replied. I've been running the gunners through advanced combat simulations all week. Even with superior tactics and first-shot advantage, we're taking catastrophic losses against simulated opponents using current-generation anti-tank weapons. How catastrophic? 70% crew fatality rate in frontal engagements. Rodriguez's voice dropped lower. I've seen the faces of these kids, Captain. They trust us to give them equipment that gives them a fighting chance. Sentinel doesn't. Hawkins felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle deeper into his shoulders. We test Winter's alternative on Saturday. If it works, we'll take the results directly to General Marshall. He has the authority to delay production until the design is modified. And if Grayson interferes? Then we go public, Hawkins said firmly. I won't let politics and profit margins determine how many body bags we fill. Rodriguez nodded, a grim smile forming. Just like old times, sir, fighting the brass instead of the enemy. The enemy wears different uniforms, Sergeant, but the stakes are the same. They parted ways shortly afterward, agreeing to maintain minimal contact until Saturday's clandestine test. As Hawkins left the Pentagon, he caught sight of a black town car idling at the VIP entrance. Raymond Thompson emerged from the building, accompanied by Colonel Grayson and a civilian Hawkins didn't recognize. The 3 men were engaged in animated conversation, Thompson gesturing emphatically as Grayson nodded in agreement. Hawkins ducked behind a pillar, observing the interaction. The unknown civilian appeared deferential to both men, handing Thompson a thick envelope before departing with a respectful handshake. Grayson and Thompson continued their discussion for several minutes before both men entered the town car and drove away. The encounter raised Hawkins' suspicions. Thompson had no official role that would warrant such apparently secretive meetings with Grayson outside normal project channels. He made a mental note to mention it to Winters when they met later. That evening, he visited the officers' club, choosing a table with a clear view of the entrance. Winters had suggested meeting there, reasoning that a public venue would draw less attention than a private conference. She arrived precisely on schedule, dressed in civilian clothes that made her look younger than her 36 years. Captain, she greeted him, sliding into the seat across from him. Glad you could make it. Lieutenant, he acknowledged, maintaining the formality appropriate for their surroundings. How's the project progressing? On schedule, she replied, her voice neutral, but her eyes conveying deeper meaning. I've finalized the material specifications. The fabrication process has begun. Any challenges I should be aware of? Winters glanced around before responding. Security has been enhanced at Aberdeen. Additional patrols, camera installations. Someone's nervous about unauthorized access. Coincidence? Possibly, but I doubt it. Sergeant Rodriguez reported similar observations. The weekend testing schedule was suddenly modified to include an unnamed VIP demonstration on Sunday morning. Hawkins frowned. They're covering all the angles. If they catch us during the testing, we'll have no plausible deniability. Then we don't get caught, Winters said simply. Rodriguez has identified the security blind spots. We'll need to work quickly and leave no evidence. What about the test equipment? We'll need monitoring systems to validate the results. Already handled. I've borrowed portable analysis equipment from the engineering lab. Nothing that will be missed before Monday. Hawkins studied her with growing admiration. Lieutenant Winters had clearly inherited her father's courage along with his intelligence. You've thought of everything. Not everything, she admitted. We still need a way to transport the armor samples without raising suspicion. They're not large, but they're heavy and would be immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with the project. Leave that to me, Hawkins said. I've arranged for a maintenance vehicle to be signed out for a routine equipment transfer to Aberdeen. We'll conceal the samples in toolboxes. Winters nodded, satisfied with the solution. There's something else you should know, Captain. I've been researching Thompson's company, Velocity Dynamics. They're in financial trouble, much worse than publicly reported. The Sentinel contract is literally keeping them solvent. That explains his desperation to keep the Liberty engine in the design, regardless of the armor compromises. Exactly, and it gets more interesting. Winters lowered her voice further. 3 members of the Defense Appropriations Committee own significant stock in Velocity Dynamics. They stand to lose millions if the company fails. So the fix is in at the highest levels, Hawkins concluded grimly. We're fighting more than just Grayson and Thompson, which means our test results need to be irrefutable. We won't get a second chance at this. They continued discussing technical details of the planned test, their conversation deliberately vague enough to sound innocuous to any potential eavesdroppers. As they prepared to leave, Hawkins remembered the encounter he'd witnessed earlier. Thompson met with Grayson today outside normal channels. There was a third man, civilian, who handed Thompson an envelope before leaving. Winters frowned. That's odd. All official project meetings are scheduled through the program office. Did you recognize the civilian? No, but he seemed deferential, possibly a contractor or consultant. I'll see what I can find out. The project's electronic calendar might have some clues. They parted ways in the parking lot, Winters driving her modest sedan back toward her temporary quarters, while Hawkins headed to his assigned apartment a few miles from the Pentagon. The night was clear and cool, autumn settling firmly over Washington, but Hawkins barely noticed the weather. His mind remained focused on the challenge ahead, weighing risks and contingencies. As he pulled into his parking space, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck made him pause. Military instinct, honed through years of combat, warned him something was wrong. He scanned the area, seeing nothing immediately suspicious, but the feeling persisted. Rather than proceeding directly to his apartment, Hawkins walked casually around the building, as if stretching his legs after the drive. As he rounded the corner, he caught a brief glimpse of movement near his front door, a shadow withdrawing hastily. Someone had been waiting for him. Hawkins continued his circuit of the building, pulling out his phone as if checking messages, but actually activating the camera function. As he approached his apartment from the opposite direction, he held the phone naturally while capturing images of the area. Later, reviewing the photos in his car, he spotted what had triggered his concern. A sedan with government plates parked 2 spaces down from his assigned spot, its occupant barely visible in the shadows. The vehicle matched the model used by Pentagon security personnel. He was under surveillance. Hawkins weighed his options. Confronting the observer would only confirm their interest in him. Attempting to evade them might escalate the situation. Better to proceed normally while exercising extreme caution in his communications and movements. He returned to his apartment, making no indication he'd noticed anything unusual. Inside, he went through his evening routine as if nothing were amiss, but his mind raced with implications. If Pentagon security was watching him, Grayson must have authorized it, which meant their suspicions were already aroused. The clandestine testing plan was in jeopardy before it had even begun. Hawkins waited until after midnight before sending a carefully worded text to Rodriguez. Weather forecast for Saturday looks uncertain. Might need to postpone our fishing trip. The response came promptly. Understood. We'll monitor conditions and advise. The coded exchange confirmed their contingency plan. Proceed with extreme caution. Be prepared to abort if surveillance became too obvious. Hawkins then removed the battery from his phone, a precaution against electronic monitoring. If they were watching his movements, they might also be listening to his conversations. Sleep came fitfully that night, his dreams haunted by memories of Desert Storm and the burning Thunder Charger. In the dreams, the faces of his lost crew members morphed into those of young soldiers he'd never met, future casualties of a flawed design that prioritized politics over protection. He awoke before dawn, his body tensed as if for combat. The sensation of being watched had not diminished. If anything, it had intensified overnight. Hawkins performed his morning routine with deliberate normalcy, watching for surveillance through reflections in windows and mirrors. The government sedan was gone, but he spotted a different vehicle in its place. This one with a driver who seemed too attentive to a newspaper for the early hour. At the Pentagon, Hawkins reported for his scheduled briefing with Grayson's staff. The colonel himself was conspicuously absent, reportedly in meetings with Defense Department officials. The briefing proceeded mechanically, with project managers here presenting status updates that carefully avoided any mention of the armor vulnerabilities. Afterward, Hawkins sought out Lieutenant Winters in the engineering lab. She was working alone, examining computer models of armor penetration scenarios on a large monitor. "Good morning, Lieutenant," he said formally, aware of the security cameras. "May I review your latest simulation results?" Winters nodded, maintaining the professional facade. "Of course, Captain. I've been running additional scenarios based on your recommendations." She adjusted the display to show a different set of simulations, these focusing on non-controversial aspects of the Sentinel design. As they discussed the results, she slid a notepad toward him, a message written in neat block letters. "We're being watched. Thompson knows." Hawkins gave no indication he'd seen the warning, continuing their technical discussion while writing his own response. "How compromised are we?" Winters glanced at his note before erasing both messages with a casual sweep of her hand. "The thermal imaging system shows excellent target acquisition capabilities," she said aloud while writing. "Not sure. Rodriguez says proceed with caution. Meet tonight, usual place 2100. Hawkins nodded, committing the information to memory. "I'd like to see the response time metrics when engaging multiple targets." Their professional interaction continued for another 20 minutes before Hawkins departed, giving no outward sign of concern. Inwardly, however, he was recalculating risks and contingencies. If Thompson suspected their plans, the stakes had risen dramatically. The contractor had powerful allies and significant financial motivation to prevent any design changes to Sentinel. Throughout the day, Hawkins maintained his routine, attending briefings and reviewing technical documents while looking for any sign that his authorization might be revoked. None came. Instead, he received an unexpected summons to General Marshal's office late in the afternoon. The general was alone when Hawkins arrived, standing at the window overlooking the Pentagon's central courtyard. He turned as Hawkins entered, his expression unreadable. "Captain Hawkins, thank you for coming on such short notice." "Of course, sir." Marshal gestured toward a chair. "Sit down, Jim. This isn't a formal meeting." Hawkins complied, noting the absence of aids or recording devices. Whatever Marshal wanted to discuss, he preferred it remain private. "I received a concerning report this morning," Marshal began. "Colonel Grayson claims you've been undermining the Sentinel project, accessing classified information without proper authorization, and potentially interfering with the testing schedule." "Sir, I can explain." Marshal raised a hand. "I'm not asking for an explanation, Captain. I'm asking for the truth. Is Sentinel combat ready?" The direct question caught Hawkins by surprise. He had expected a reprimand, not an opportunity for candor. He chose his words carefully. "No, sir, it is not. The armor protection is inadequate against modern anti-tank weapons. Crew survivability in a direct engagement would be unacceptably low." Marshal nodded slowly as if confirming a suspicion. "And Colonel Grayson is aware of this vulnerability?" "Yes, sir. The test data is conclusive, but it's been selectively presented to oversight committees." "Because of the production schedule?" "That's part of it, sir," Hawkins acknowledged, "but there are also financial and political considerations. The Liberty engine contract with Velocity Dynamics represents significant economic interests." Marshall returned to his desk, sitting heavily in his chair. "Damn it, Jim. I knew there were compromises being made, but I didn't realize they were this severe." He fixed Hawkins with a penetrating stare. "What would you do if you were in my position?" "Order a comprehensive review of the armor design, sir. Delay production until the vulnerability is addressed. Even if it means missing deployment deadlines? Even if it costs billions in contract penalties and congressional inquiries? Even then, sir, no production schedule is worth American lives." Marshall was silent for a long moment, weighing Hawkins' words against the complex political realities of his position. "I've known Bill Grayson for 20 years, he said finally. "He's not a bad man, Jim. He's making the decisions he believes are necessary for national security. With respect, sir, compromising crew protection isn't a necessity, it's a choice. A choice made far above his pay grade or mine." Marshall sighed. "The Defense Appropriations Committee has made it clear that any delay in Sentinel's production would have serious budgetary consequences. The department is already fighting for funding on multiple fronts." "So politics trumps protection," Hawkins said bitterly. "It shouldn't, but often does." Marshall leaned forward. I can't officially delay the program without concrete evidence of a critical design flaw. Not speculation or simulation results, but actual test data that proves the vulnerability beyond any doubt. Hawkins recognized the opening Marshall was providing, and if such evidence existed, then I would have no choice but to intervene, regardless of the political fallout. Marshall's expression made clear he understood the subtext of their conversation, but obtaining such evidence would require authorized testing protocols and proper documentation. Of course, sir. I'm leaving for Europe tomorrow, Marshall continued. NATO consultations that can't be postponed. I'll return Monday evening. If any significant developments occur in my absence, I expect to be briefed immediately upon my return. The message was clear. Marshall was giving Hawkins a narrow window of opportunity while maintaining plausible deniability for himself. Whatever happened during the general's absence, he wanted no official knowledge until after the fact. I understand, sir. Good. Marshall stood, signaling the end of their meeting. And Captain, watch your back. This project has powerful stakeholders who won't appreciate interference, no matter how well-intentioned. I've noticed the surveillance, sir. That wasn't my doing, Marshall assured him, which means someone else is sufficiently concerned about your activities to allocate resources to watching you. Thompson, Hawkins concluded, likely though he'd need authorization from someone in the chain of command. Marshall's expression darkened. Be careful, Jim. There's more at stake here than just a tank design. Hawkins left the meeting with mixed emotions. Marshall had effectively granted tacit approval for their clandestine testing while making clear he could offer no official protection if they were caught. The general was walking a precarious political tightrope, balancing his responsibility to the troops against his obligations to the chain of command. That evening, Hawkins arrived at the officers' club precisely at 2100 hours. Winters was already there, seated at the same table they'd occupied previously. Rodriguez joined them minutes later, his civilian clothes a stark contrast to his usual crisp uniform. We may have a problem, the sergeant said without preamble, his voice low. Security protocols at Aberdeen have been enhanced. Additional guards, new access restrictions, unscheduled inspections of all vehicles entering or leaving the facility. Thompson's doing? Hawkins asked. Possibly, though the orders came through official channels. Colonel Grayson signed off on them personally. Winters leaned forward. They're expecting us to try something. We need to change our approach. Or our timing, Hawkins suggested. The enhanced security is focused on Saturday night because of Rodriguez's initial message to me. What if we move the test to Friday instead? Rodriguez considered this. It could work. Security will be at minimum staffing on Friday night, with most personnel preparing for the weekend VIP demonstration. Can you be ready by tomorrow night? Hawkins asked Winters. She nodded confidently. The armor samples are complete. I can have them packaged for transport by 1800 hours. What about the maintenance vehicle? Rodriguez asked. I'll adjust the requisition, Hawkins replied. The paperwork will show a routine equipment transfer scheduled for Friday evening instead of Saturday. They spent the next hour refining their plan, accounting for the changed timeline and increased security measures. As they prepared to leave, Winters handed Hawkins and Rodriguez each a small device. Secure communicators, she explained. Military-grade encryption, short range only. If we need to abort suddenly, we can communicate without using our personal phones. Hawkins examined the device with approval. Where did you get these? I have friends in the communications division, she replied with a slight smile. They're testing prototypes and won't miss 3 units over the weekend. Lieutenant, you continue to impress me, Rodriguez said with genuine admiration. I learned from the best, she replied, a flicker of sadness crossing her features. My father always said proper preparation prevents poor performance. The 5 Ps, Hawkins and Rodriguez said simultaneously, sharing a knowing look. You both knew him well, Winters observed. He was a good soldier, Rodriguez affirmed. One of the best I ever served with. He saved the captain's life, you know. You mentioned that, she said quietly. I never knew the details. The official report just said he died in action during the final days of Desert Storm. Hawkins felt the familiar weight of survivor's guilt. Your father's tank was part of the relief column that reached us after the Thundercharger was hit. He helped Rodriguez pull me from the wreckage before the ammunition cooked off. 2 days later, his own tank took a hit in almost the exact same spot, Rodriguez continued solemnly. The turret armor failed to stop a shaped charge. None of them made it out. Winters absorbed this information, her expression a complex mixture of pride and grief. He would be proud of what we're doing, she said finally. making sure other fathers come home to their children. Yes, he would, Hawkins agreed softly. They parted ways shortly afterward, each returning to their quarters by separate routes to minimize the chance of their meeting being noticed. Hawkins remained vigilant for signs of surveillance, but detected nothing obvious. Either they had shaken the watchers or the surveillance had become more sophisticated. The next day passed with excruciating slowness. Hawkins maintained his normal routine, attending briefings and reviewing documents while waiting for the evening's covert operation. At midday, he received confirmation from both Winters and Rodriguez that preparations were proceeding according to plan. As the workday came to an end, Hawkins made a deliberate show of preparing to leave for the weekend, packing his briefcase with non-essential documents and bidding farewell to colleagues. Instead of leaving the Pentagon, however, he made his way to a seldom-used storage area where Winters' mum had arranged to stage the armor samples. She was waiting for him, two heavy-duty toolboxes at her feet. "Everything's ready," she reported. "The samples are secured inside along with the testing equipment. Any sign of surveillance?" "Nothing obvious, but I've been careful. The maintenance vehicle is waiting at the loading dock." Hawkins lifted one of the toolboxes, noting its substantial weight. "Let's go." They proceeded to the loading dock, maintaining casual conversation about weekend plans in case anyone overheard them. The maintenance vehicle, a nondescript panel van with Department of Defense markings, was positioned as arranged. Rodriguez sat in the driver's seat, dressed in appropriate maintenance coveralls. "Evening, folks," he greeted them with practiced nonchalance. "Everything ready for transport?" "All set," Hawkins confirmed, loading the toolboxes into the van's cargo area. "Standard equipment transfer to Aberdeen, as authorized." Rodriguez handed him a clipboard with official-looking paperwork. "Sign here, Captain. Just confirming the chain of custody." Hawkins signed the form, completing the illusion of a routine transfer. He and Winters then climbed into the van, Winters taking the passenger seat while Hawkins positioned himself in the cargo area with the toolboxes. As they departed the Pentagon complex, passing through security with minimal scrutiny, Hawkins felt the familiar tension that preceded combat operations. His senses sharpened, adrenaline narrowing his focus to the mission at hand. They were committed now, past the point of easy deniability if caught. The drive to Aberdeen took just over an hour, Rodriguez maintaining exactly the speed limit to avoid drawing attention. They spoke little during the journey, each lost in their own thoughts about the significance of what they were attempting. As they approached the Aberdeen proving ground, Rodriguez activated the secure communicator. "Security checkpoint ahead. Standard procedure is to check ID and verify the transfer authorization. They rarely inspect the cargo for routine maintenance vehicles." "Understood," Hawkins acknowledged. "We'll let you handle the talking." Rodriguez slowed as they reached the checkpoint, presenting his identification and transfer papers to the guard on duty. The guard examined the documents with professional thoroughness, comparing the authorization codes to those on his computer terminal. "Purpose of visit?" he asked. "Equipment transfer for tomorrow's demonstration," Rodriguez replied easily. "Maintenance components for the test range systems." The guard nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Vehicle inspection required for all entries after 1800 hours, he stated, gesturing toward a secondary inspection area. Rodriguez maintained his composure. "No problem, standard procedure." He drove to the indicated area where a second guard approached with a handheld scanning device. "Please step out of the vehicle while we complete the inspection." Hawkins exchanged a tense glance with Winters. This was an unexpected complication. If the guard opened the toolboxes, their mission would end before it began, likely along with their careers. "Evening, Specialist," Rodriguez greeted the guard, recognizing his rank as he exited the van. "Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez, Advanced Gunnery Training Division. I'm just delivering some maintenance equipment for tomorrow's VIP demonstration." "Yes, Sergeant, I'll need to inspect the cargo." "Of course," Rodriguez agreed amiably, "though you might want to check with Lieutenant Colonel Weber first. He specifically requested this equipment for the Euro 800 demonstration, and he's particular about who handles it." The guard hesitated, clearly recognizing Weber's name. The lieutenant colonel was notoriously demanding and had a reputation for making life difficult for anyone who interfered with his preparations. "What exactly are you delivering?" the guard asked, his tone softening slightly. "Calibration equipment for the targeting sensors," Rodriguez explained, the technical jargon flowing convincingly. "Specialized tools that require careful handling. The components are sensitive to static electricity and environmental contaminants." The guard glanced at the toolboxes visible through the van's rear windows, then at his handheld scanner. "I should still check the cargo, Sergeant." "I understand completely," Rodriguez said sympathetically. "Just trying to save us both a headache if Weber finds fingerprints on his equipment. You know how he gets." This reference to Weber's well-known perfectionism seemed to strike home. The guard lowered his scanner slightly. "The authorization checks out," he said finally, "and your ID is valid. I suppose we can expedite the process this once, considering Lieutenant Colonel Weber's involvement." "I appreciate it, Specialist," Rodriguez said with apparent gratitude. "I'll be sure to mention your efficiency to the Colonel." The guard waved them through, returning to his station with visible relief at avoiding potential conflict with Weber. Rodriguez returned to the driver's seat, maintaining his casual demeanor until they were well past the checkpoint. "That was too close," he muttered once they were safely out of earshot. "Quick thinking," Hawkins commended him. "Weber's reputation comes in handy." "Let's just hope he doesn't hear about his special equipment before we're finished," Rodriguez replied grimly. They proceeded to the maintenance facility where Rodriguez had arranged access, parking in a service bay normally used for vehicle repairs. The facility was deserted at this hour, most personnel having departed for the weekend. "We have approximately 3 hours before the next security patrol," Rodriguez informed them as they unloaded the toolboxes. "The test range is a quarter-mile from here. We'll need to move the equipment on foot to avoid vehicle logs." Winters opened one of the toolboxes, revealing the armor samples nestled in protective padding. Each sample was approximately 2 feet square, representing different sections of the tank's armor configuration. The second toolbox contained testing equipment, sensors, a data recorder, and a specialized projectile launcher designed to simulate anti-tank weapons. "The samples are heavy," she warned, "about 80 pounds each. I brought a collapsible cart, but the terrain to the range isn't ideal for wheeled transport." "We'll manage," Hawkins assured her, lifting the first sample to gauge its weight. "Rodriguez and I have carried heavier loads under worse conditions." They transferred the equipment to the cart and proceeded cautiously toward the test range, using service pathways to avoid the main roads where security cameras might record their movements. The night was clear and cool, a half moon providing just enough light to navigate without artificial illumination that might attract attention. At the test range, they quickly set up the equipment according to Winter's precise instructions. The projectile launcher was positioned at the standard testing distance, aimed at a mounting bracket designed to hold the armor samples at the exact angle they would be positioned on the Sentinel tank. "We'll start with the current production design," Winters explained, securing the first sample to the bracket. "This represents the frontal turret armor as specified in Grayson's approved configuration." Hawkins examined the sample, noting its relatively thin profile and composite layering. "And you're confident your alternative design provides superior protection?" "The simulations are conclusive," she replied, "but actual testing will provide irrefutable proof." Rodriguez positioned the projectile launcher, calibrating its settings to match the capabilities of modern anti-tank weapons. "Ready when you are." They moved to a protected observation position, Winters activating the data recorders that would document the test results in meticulous detail. "Commencing Test 1, she announced. "Standard production armor versus simulated RPG-29 impact." Rodriguez triggered the launcher. The projectile struck the armor sample with devastating effect, penetrating completely and exiting the other side with sufficient remaining velocity to cause catastrophic damage to anything behind it. "Complete penetration," Winters noted, reviewing the sensor data. "The armor failed to stop or significantly degrade the projectile's effectiveness." "In a real Sentinel, that would mean a dead crew," Rodriguez stated flatly. "And this is against current generation weapons," Hawkins added. "Future threats will be even more capable." Winters nodded grimly. "Now let's test my alternative design." They replaced the damaged sample with Winters' modified version. Though similar in overall dimensions, the alternative featured a different composite layering system and strategic reinforcement at critical stress points. "Commencing Test 2, Winters announced. Modified armor design versus identical projectile." Again, Rodriguez triggered the launcher. This time the result was dramatically different. The projectile struck the armor with the same force but failed to penetrate completely. Instead, it became embedded in the composite layers, its kinetic energy absorbed and dissipated throughout the material. "Partial penetration only," Winters reported, excitement evident in her voice despite her professional demeanor. The projectile was contained within the outer layers. In an actual tank, this would result in minimal internal damage and likely no crew casualties. Hawkins examined the armor sample with growing hope. "The weight difference? Less than 7% increase," she confirmed, well within acceptable parameters for the Sentinel's suspension and power systems. They conducted 4 additional tests, varying the projectile type and impact angle to simulate different combat scenarios. In each case, the standard armor failed catastrophically, while Winter's alternative design provided significantly improved protection. The evidence is conclusive, Hawkins stated as they reviewed the final results. Your design works, Lieutenant. It would save lives. But will it be enough to convince Grayson and his superiors? Rodriguez questioned. It has to be, Winters replied, securing the test data in a protective case. The numbers don't lie. My design provides at least 60% better protection against current threats and can be implemented with minimal impact on production timelines. As they began dismantling the test equipment, a distant sound froze them in place. Vehicle engines approaching from the main road. Security patrol, Rodriguez warned. They're early. Hawkins made a quick decision. Pack up the essential evidence, leave the rest. We need to move now. They hurriedly gathered the data recorders and armor samples, abandoning the projectile launcher and mounting bracket. Those items, while suspicious if discovered, couldn't be definitively linked to them without additional evidence. Rodriguez led them along a maintenance path that skirted the perimeter of the test range, keeping to shadows and avoiding open areas where the approaching vehicle's headlights might reveal their presence. They had nearly reached the maintenance facility when a second vehicle appeared, approaching from the opposite direction. They're boxing us in, Hawkins realized. This isn't a routine patrol. There, Winters pointed toward a storage shed near the maintenance building. We can wait until they pass. They hurried to the shed, finding it unlocked. Inside, military equipment was stored in neat rows, providing ample hiding places. They positioned themselves behind a stack of crates, listening intently as the vehicles converged outside. Through a small window, Hawkins observed 4 men exit the first vehicle. They wore civilian clothes but moved with military precision, fanning out to search the area systematically. The second vehicle yielded 2 more men, one of whom Hawkins recognized with a surge of anger. Raymond Thompson. It's Thompson, he whispered to the others. This isn't a security patrol. They're looking specifically for us. How did they know? Winters asked, her voice barely audible. Someone must have observed our preparations or intercepted our communications, Rodriguez suggested. The timing is too precise to be coincidence. Thompson directed his men toward the test range, presumably where they had detected signs of the testing activity. This provided a temporary reprieve, giving Hawkins precious moments to formulate an escape plan. The maintenance vehicle is still in the service bay, he noted. If we can reach it, we can drive out the south gate. Rodriguez, you still have the authorization paperwork. It won't get us past a dedicated search, Rodriguez warned. Thompson's men aren't regular security personnel. They look like private contractors, which means they don't have full military authority, Hawkins countered. If challenged, we stick to our cover story. Routine equipment transfer, fully authorized. They waited until Thompson and his men were out of sight, then moved quickly from the shed to the maintenance facility. The service bay remained unguarded, their vehicle apparently overlooked in the search for personnel rather than equipment. Get the engine started, Hawkins instructed Rodriguez. Winters, secure the evidence in the hidden compartment we prepared. As Rodriguez slid behind the wheel, Winters carefully packed the data recorders and documentation into a concealed space beneath the van's floor panels. Hawkins kept watch, monitoring the movements of Thompson's search party through the facility's windows. They're coming back, he warned as flashlight beams appeared in the distance. They must have found the abandoned test equipment. Rodriguez started the engine, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet night. Ready when you are, Captain. Hawkins made a split-second decision. Go. Head for the south gate at normal speed. Don't attract attention. The van pulled out of the service bay just as Thompson's men rounded the corner of the maintenance building. Hawkins caught a glimpse of surprised recognition on Thompson's face before they accelerated away, maintaining a deliberate pace that suggested routine rather than escape. They've spotted us, he informed the others tensely, but they can't know for certain what we were doing or what evidence we might have gathered. Unless they've placed someone at the exit gate, Winters pointed out, in which case we're driving into a trap. Rodriguez maintained his composure, navigating the winding roads of the proving ground with practiced ease. There's an alternative route, emergency access road that bypasses the main gates. It's rarely used and minimally guarded. Take it, Hawkins ordered without hesitation. Rodriguez veered onto a narrower road that skirted the perimeter fence, eventually arriving at a simple gate secured by a padlock chain. A single guard booth stood nearby, currently unoccupied. Standard procedure is to check in at the main gate before using emergency exits, Rodriguez explained. But I have master keys from my instructor authorization. He stopped the van and quickly approached the gate, unlocking the padlock with the key from his keyring. As he was securing the gate behind the van, headlights appeared in the distance, approaching rapidly. Thompson's men, Hawkins confirmed, recognizing the vehicle. They're in pursuit. Rodriguez jumped back into the driver's seat, accelerating through the gate and onto the access road beyond. They won't risk firing on us, he said confidently. Too many questions would be asked about armed civilians operating on a military installation. His assessment proved accurate. Though Thompson's vehicle followed them to the perimeter, it stopped at the gate, unable or unwilling to continue the pursuit beyond the bounds of Aberdeen Proving Ground. They drove in tense silence for several miles, watching for any sign of continued pursuit. When none materialized, Winters finally voiced what they were all thinking. We have the evidence, but Thompson knows what we've done. He'll alert Grayson immediately, which means we have the narrow window to present our findings before they can prepare a counter-narrative, Hawkins concluded. We need to reach General Marshall as soon as he returns from Europe. That's still 2 days away, Rodriguez pointed out. A lot can happen in 2 days. Then we need to secure the evidence and lay low until Marshall returns, Hawkins decided. Winters, can you compile a comprehensive report on the test results? Absolutely. I'll need about 12 hours to process all the data and prepare a formal presentation. Good. We'll reconvene tomorrow evening to review the findings before meeting Marshall on Monday. They returned to Washington without further incident, taking a circuitous route to ensure they weren't followed. After securing the van in a commercial parking facility where it wouldn't attract attention, they transferred the evidence to Winters' personal vehicle for transport to her quarters. Be careful, Hawkins cautioned her. Thompson will be looking for that evidence. Don't trust anyone until we've presented our findings to Marshall. I understand, she assured him. I'll contact you when the report is complete. As they prepared to separate, Rodriguez placed a hand on Hawkins' shoulder. Just like old times, eh, Captain? Fighting the system instead of the enemy. The system is supposed to protect our soldiers, not endanger them, Hawkins replied grimly. Whatever happens next, we've done the right thing. Your father would be proud, Rodriguez told Winters. He was always about doing what's right, no matter the cost. She nodded, emotion briefly overwhelming her professional composure. Thank you, Sergeant. That means more than you know. They parted ways, each returning to their quarters by different routes. Hawkins remained vigilant for signs of surveillance, but detected nothing obvious. Either their pursuers had lost track of them, or they were biding their time, waiting for a more opportune moment to strike. At his apartment, Hawkins found no signs of intrusion or surveillance. Nevertheless, he slept lightly, his combat instincts keeping him alert to any unusual sounds or movements. His dreams, when they came, were fragmented images of burning tanks and falling soldiers. The faces of his lost crew intermingled with those of unknown young men and women who would crew the Sentinel in future conflicts. Morning brought no messages from either Winters or Rodriguez, which Hawkins interpreted as a good sign. No news meant no complications had arisen overnight. He spent the day reviewing his notes and preparing his own summary of the testing results, focusing on the tactical and operational implications rather than the technical specifications that Winters would cover comprehensively. By late afternoon, his phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Winters. Report complete, ready for review at 1900. He acknowledged the message and began preparing to leave when his phone rang again. This time, it was a direct call from an unknown number. Hawkins answered cautiously. Captain Hawkins. The voice belonged to Colonel Grayson, his tone coldly formal. Report to my office immediately. We need to discuss your activities last night. I'm off duty today, Colonel, Hawkins replied, playing for time. Can this wait until Monday? No, Captain, it cannot. I expect you at the Pentagon within the hour. Failure to appear will be considered insubordination. The call ended before Hawkins could respond. He immediately contacted Rodriguez using the secure communicator. Grayson knows he summoned me to his office. Thompson must have reported our activities, Rodriguez replied. What's your plan? I'll meet with Grayson. Buy us time while Winters secures the evidence. Tell her to proceed with caution and await my signal. Roger that. Watch yourself, Captain. They're desperate now. Hawkins arrived at the Pentagon precisely 1 hour after Grayson's call. The weekend security procedures meant fewer personnel were present. The corridors unnaturally quiet compared to weekday operations. Grayson's administrative assistant was absent, her desk unoccupied. The colonel himself was waiting in his office, seated behind his desk with rigid posture that reflected his military background. To Hawkins' surprise, Thompson was also present, standing near the window with poorly concealed agitation. "Captain Hawkins," Grayson acknowledged his arrival with cold formality. "Please close the door." Hawkins complied, noting the tension in the room. "You wanted to see me, Colonel?" "I think we can dispense with the pretense, Captain," Grayson replied sharply. "I know what you, Lieutenant Winters, and Sergeant Rodriguez were doing at Aberdeen last night. We were conducting a routine equipment transfer, sir, fully authorized and documented." "Don't insult my intelligence, Hawkins," Grayson snapped. "You conducted unauthorized testing of alternative armor configurations in direct violation of project security protocols and my explicit instructions." Thompson stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "You've interfered with a critical defense program, son Captain. That's bordering on treason during a time of heightened international tensions." "Treason?" Hawkins repeated incredulously. "Testing armor that could save American lives is now considered treason?" "Undermining the Pentagon's official position on Sentinel's readinesses," Thompson insisted. "You've potentially compromised national security with your rogue operation." "What I've done is expose a fatal flaw in the Sentinel design," Hawkins countered, abandoning the pretense of denial. "A flaw that both of you have known about and deliberately concealed to protect production schedules and profit margins." Grayson's expression hardened. "You're making accusations you can't substantiate, Captain." "On the contrary, Colonel, Lieutenant Winters and I have compiled conclusive evidence that the current armor configuration fails against modern anti-tank weapons, while her alternative design provides significantly improved protection with minimal impact on weight or production timelines. Evidence obtained through unauthorized testing has no standing in official evaluations," Grayson stated flatly. "Furthermore, any materials removed from Aberdeen Proving Ground without proper authorization constitute stolen government property. I prefer to think of it as safeguarding critical information that others were attempting to suppress," Hawkins replied evenly. Thompson slammed his fist on Grayson's desk. "This is outrageous. Colonel, I want him arrested immediately. Him and his conspirators." "On what charges exactly?" Hawkins challenged. "Testing armor, documenting vulnerabilities that you've deliberately concealed from oversight committees? I wonder how the Senate Armed Services Committee would view that concealment, Mr. Thompson." "Are you threatening us, Captain?" Grayson asked quietly. "I'm suggesting that transparency serves everyone's interests, sir, especially the soldiers whose lives depend on Sentinel's performance in combat." The room fell silent as Grayson considered the implications. Thompson paced nervously, his earlier bluster giving way to calculation as he assessed the potential damage to his company's interests. "Where is this evidence now?" Grayson finally asked. "In a secure location," Hawkins replied vaguely. "It will be presented to General Marshall upon his return from Europe." "Marshall has no authority to unilaterally alter the Sentinel design at this stage," Thompson interjected. "The production contracts are signed. Materials are already being procured. General Marshall has a responsibility to ensure that equipment provided to American forces meets acceptable standards for crew protection," Hawkins countered. "I believe he'll fulfill that responsibility once he reviews our findings." Grayson leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "What exactly are you proposing, Captain?" "Implementation of Lieutenant Winters' alternative armor design for all production models of Sentinel. The modifications can be incorporated with minimal disruption to the overall schedule." "Impossible," Thompson exclaimed. "The cost implications alone would be prohibitive, not to mention the delays in material procurement and tooling adjustments." "The cost of the modifications would be negligible compared to the potential loss of life and equipment in combat," Hawkins argued, "and Lieutenant Winters has already developed an implementation plan that minimizes production delays." Grayson studied Hawkins with a calculating gaze. "And if we agree to review these findings, you would withhold them from wider distribution? Keep this matter internal to the Sentinel project?" Hawkins recognized the attempted compromise for what it was, a stalling tactic that would allow Grayson and Thompson to develop counter-arguments or potentially suppress the evidence entirely. "I'm afraid that's not acceptable, Colonel. The evidence will be presented to General Marshall as planned. What happens after that depends on the Pentagon's response." "This is blackmail," Thompson sputtered indignantly. "This is accountability," Hawkins corrected him. "Something that seems to be in short supply within the Sentinel program." Grayson's phone rang, interrupting the tense exchange. He answered briefly, his expression shifting from annoyance to concern as he listened to the caller. After hanging up, He fixed Hawkins with a hard stare. It seems Lieutenant Winters has failed to report for her scheduled duty assignment this afternoon. Would you know anything about that, Captain? A cold dread settled in Hawkins' stomach, though he maintained his outward composure. I haven't spoken with Lieutenant Winters since yesterday. A concerning coincidence, Grayson observed. The lieutenant disappears on the same day you admit to possessing evidence that could potentially derail the Sentinel program. If Lieutenant Winters is missing, perhaps you should be organizing a search rather than making insinuations, Hawkins suggested sharply. Security personnel are already investigating, Grayson assured him. In the meantime, Captain, you are relieved of your advisory duties on the Sentinel project, effective immediately. You will return to Fort Knox pending an official inquiry into your unauthorized activities. On whose authority? Mine as project director, with the full support of the Assistant Secretary of Defense. Grayson's tone brooked no argument. You will surrender your Pentagon access credentials before leaving the building. Hawkins recognized the dismissal for what it was, an attempt to isolate him from potential allies within the project while they located and secured the testing evidence. If Winters was truly missing, the situation had become far more serious than he had anticipated. Is there anything else, Colonel? He asked, maintaining his military bearing despite the churning concern for Winters' safety. Yes, consider this a formal warning, Captain. Interference with the Sentinel program from this point forward will result in court-martial proceedings. Is that understood? Perfectly, sir. Hawkins came to attention, saluted crisply, and departed, his mind racing with implications and contingencies. In the corridor outside, he activated his secure communicator as soon as he was beyond surveillance range. Rodriguez, we have a problem. Winters is missing. Missing? Since when? Unknown. Grayson just informed me she failed to report for duty today. Have you had any contact with her since we separated last night? Negative. Last communication was her message about completing the report. Something's wrong, Hawkins concluded grimly. Grayson has relieved me of duty and ordered me back to Fort Knox. They're trying to contain the situation while they locate the evidence. What's our play, Captain? Hawkins considered their options rapidly. Meet me at the agreed location. We need to find Winters before they do. As he exited the Pentagon, surrendering his access credentials as ordered, Hawkins felt the weight of decision bearing down on him. Winters' disappearance changed everything. What had begun as a principled stand against bureaucratic compromise had escalated into something far more dangerous. If Thompson or his allies had taken action against Winters to secure the evidence, they had crossed a line that Hawkins couldn't ignore. Whatever happened next, he was committed to seeing it through, not only for the faceless future crews of Sentinel tanks, but now for Lieutenant Sarah Winters as well, the daughter of a fallen comrade who had saved his life, and who might now be in danger for following her father's example of doing what was right, regardless of the cost. Raindrops streaked the windshield of Hawkins' borrowed sedan as he parked across from Winters' apartment building. The sky had darkened prematurely, heavy clouds rolling in from the west, matching his somber mood. Rodriguez sat in the passenger seat, his weathered face tense with concern. No signs of surveillance, the sergeant reported, scanning the surroundings with practiced eyes. But that doesn't mean they're not watching. We need to move quickly, Hawkins replied. If Thompson's people got to Winters, they'll be looking for us next. They exited the car, collars turned up against the rain, and approached the building with deliberate casualness. The security door yielded to the key Winters had provided during their contingency planning, granting them access to the modest lobby. Apartment 307, Hawkins reminded Rodriguez as they ascended the stairs, avoiding the elevator where cameras might record their presence. The third-floor corridor was deserted, the muffled sounds of weekend television filtering through doors as residents settled in for the evening. Winters' apartment was at the far end, its door undisturbed at first glance. Hawkins knocked, waiting for a response he didn't expect. When none came, he extracted a small toolkit from his jacket pocket, selecting a tension wrench and pick. Military police training, he explained at Rodriguez's raised eyebrow. Never thought I'd use it for breaking and entering. Not breaking and entering, Rodriguez countered. Wellness check on a missing comrade. The lock yielded within seconds, allowing them entry to Winters' apartment. Hawkins closed the door quietly behind them, surveying the space with mounting concern. The apartment was immaculate, almost unnaturally so. No dirty dishes in the sink, no clothing draped over furniture. Nothing out of place. Too perfect, as if it had been deliberately arranged. Something's wrong, Rodriguez voiced Hawkins' thoughts. This doesn't feel right. They moved methodically through the small apartment, checking each room for signs of Winters or indications of what might have happened to her. The bedroom was as pristine as the living area, the bed neatly made, no personal items visible on nightstands or dresser tops. Clear, Rodriguez reported, emerging from the bathroom. No signs of struggle anywhere. Check this out, Hawkins called from the small home office alcove. Her computer's gone, so are all her files and notebooks. Rodriguez joined him, noting the empty desk with its power cables now connected to nothing. Professional job. They took anything that might contain project information. But where's Winters? Hawkins wondered aloud, frustration edging his voice. As if in answer, Rodriguez's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He checked it, his expression shifting from concern to grim determination. Unknown sender, he reported, but the message is clear enough. Storage Unit 23, Capital Self-Storage, Route 295, combination 113742, come alone or she dies. Hawkins felt a cold fury building inside him. They have her. It's a trap, Rodriguez stated flatly. Obviously, Hawkins agreed, but we can't ignore it. If they've hurt her, what's our play, Captain? Hawkins considered their options, limited as they were. We can't go in blind, and we can't trust that they'll release her even if we deliver the evidence. We need backup, Rodriguez suggested. Someone with authority Thompson can't override. General Marshall won't be back until tomorrow evening, Hawkins reminded him. We don't have that kind of time. Rodriguez checked his watch. What about Marshall's aide, Colonel Jenkins? He's still in Washington, and he has direct access to Marshall, regardless of where the general is physically located. Hawkins considered this. Jenkins was a career officer with a reputation for integrity, someone who might act if presented with compelling evidence of wrongdoing. It's worth a shot, he decided, but we need to divide our efforts. You contact Jenkins, show him the preliminary test results we saved to your secure drive. I'll check out this storage facility, see if I can locate Winters without springing their trap. Negative, sir, Rodriguez objected firmly. Tactical situation requires minimum two-man team. I'm going with you. And if Jenkins refuses to help without seeing the evidence firsthand, then we deal with Thompson and his thugs ourselves, Rodriguez replied grimly. We've faced worse odds. Hawkins nodded, acknowledging the truth in Rodriguez's assessment. All right, we go together. But first, let's gather what we need. They departed Winters' apartment as carefully as they had entered, leaving no trace of their presence. The rain had intensified, shrouding the city in a gray veil that provided welcome concealment as they retrieved supplies from Rodriguez's off-base quarters, tactical vests, flashlights, and most importantly, Rodriguez's personal sidearm with spare ammunition. Just in case, the sergeant explained as he checked the weapon's action. Thompson's men won't hesitate to use force if cornered. We're not looking for a firefight, Hawkins cautioned. This is a rescue operation, not combat. Tell that to them, Rodriguez replied. I've seen the type of contractors Thompson employs, ex-military with flexible ethics and hard skills. They're dangerous, Captain. The storage facility was located on the outskirts of Washington, a sprawling complex of numbered units arranged in long rows like a miniature city of corrugated metal. Security was minimal, consisting of a keypad entry gate and sparse camera coverage focused primarily on the entrance and office area. They parked half a mile away, approaching on foot through the adjacent industrial park, using the continuing rainfall as cover. The perimeter fence proved a minor obstacle, easily overcome with Rodriguez's wire cutters. Unit 23 should be in the northeast quadrant, Hawkins whispered as they slipped between rows of storage units. Stay sharp. They moved silently through the maze of buildings, years of combat experience evident in their coordinated movements and constant visual scanning. When they finally located Unit 23, they positioned themselves on either side of the roll-up door, assessing the situation before proceeding. No external lock, Rodriguez observed. The combination must be for an interior safe or container. Hawkins nodded. They're waiting inside, 2 men minimum, probably more. How do you want to play this? Hawkins considered their limited options. Direct approach. We announce ourselves, demand proof that Winters is alive and unharmed, then we negotiate from there. And if negotiation fails, then we improvise, Hawkins replied grimly. Ready? Rodriguez checked his weapon one last time. Ready. Hawkins stepped forward and rapped sharply on the metal door. Thompson, we know you're in there. We want to speak with Lieutenant Winters. Silence greeted his demand. He tried again, louder this time. Thompson, open the door. Let's discuss this like reasonable men. The door began to rise slowly, mechanical gears whirring in the silence. As it ascended, light spilled out from the interior, temporarily blinding them after the darkness outside. Hawkins shielded his eyes, straining to see into the illuminated space. The storage unit was larger than standard, perhaps 20 feet deep and 15 wide. Metal shelving lined the walls, holding unmarked boxes and containers. In the center stood a table with a laptop computer open and running. Behind it sat Lieutenant Winters, her expression a mixture of relief and concern upon seeing them. "Captain Hawkins," she called out, "it's a trap. Get out now." Before Hawkins could react, men emerged from hiding places within the unit. Two from behind the shelving units, another from a previously concealed side door. All were armed, their weapons trained on Hawkins and Rodriguez. Raymond Thompson stepped into view from behind a stack of crates, his expression triumphant. "Captain Hawkins, Sergeant Rodriguez, how kind of you to join us. Please come in. And Sergeant, I suggest you place your weapon on the ground," slowly. Rodriguez hesitated, calculating odds that were clearly against them. Hawkins gave a slight nod, and the sergeant carefully set his sidearm on the concrete floor. "Kick it away from you," ordered one of the armed men, his stance and demeanor screaming military background. Rodriguez complied, pushing the weapon toward the far wall with his foot. "Now then," Thompson continued, "let's discuss the evidence you stole from Aberdeen Proving Ground." "We didn't steal anything," Hawkins countered, maintaining his composure despite the dangerous situation. "We conducted legitimate testing that you and Colonel Grayson have been deliberately suppressing." "Semantics, Captain," Thompson dismissed with a wave of his hand. "The fact remains that you possess data and materials that could potentially compromise a multi-billion-dollar defense contract. I need those materials returned immediately." "Where is the evidence, Lieutenant?" Hawkins asked Winters directly, ignoring Thompson. "They don't have it," she replied steadily. "I secured it before they found me. That's why they need you, Captain. They think you know where it is." Thompson's smile tightened. "Lieutenant Winters has been uncooperative despite our persuasive techniques. We hoped you might be more reasonable, especially with your colleagues' welfare at stake." Hawkins noted the bruise forming on Winters' cheek, a surge of anger rising within him. "You're making a serious mistake, Thompson. Assaulting a military officer is a federal offense." "Only if it can be proven," Thompson replied coldly. "And I'm afraid there won't be any witnesses to these unfortunate events." "What exactly are you planning?" Rodriguez demanded. "You can't make 3 military officers disappear without consequences." 3 officers who tragically died in a confrontation over stolen military secrets, Thompson corrected. "A regrettable incident that will be thoroughly investigated, with the evidence conveniently pointing to your unauthorized activities and Lieutenant Winters' mental instability following her father's combat death." "You've thought of everything," Hawkins observed, playing for time as he assessed their options. "Except one thing." "And what's that, Captain?" "General Marshall already knows about the armor vulnerabilities. I briefed him before your men took Lieutenant Winters." Thompson's confidence faltered momentarily before his smirk returned. "A bluff, Captain. Marshall is in Europe until tomorrow evening. We've been monitoring his communications. There's been no irregular contact." "Are you certain of that?" Hawkins pressed, exploiting the seed of doubt he'd planted. "Marshall has secure channels even you can't monitor." As Thompson hesitated, weighing Hawkins' claim, Rodriguez made his move. With practiced precision, he extracted a flashbang grenade from a concealed pocket in his tactical vest and hurled it toward the center of the room. "Down!" he shouted as the device clattered across the concrete floor. Hawkins dove toward Winters, tackling her from the chair as the grenade detonated with a blinding flash and deafening concussion. Disoriented shouts filled the storage unit as Thompson's men reeled from the sensory overload. In the chaos, Rodriguez retrieved his sidearm from where it had been kicked, covering Hawkins as he helped Winters to her feet. They retreated toward the door, Rodriguez firing 2 warning shots into the ceiling when one of Thompson's men recovered enough to reach for his weapon. "Move," Hawkins ordered, guiding Winters through the doorway as Rodriguez maintained their cover. They sprinted through the maze of storage units, the sound of pursuit growing behind them. Rain continued to fall, reducing visibility and making the concrete paths treacherously slick. Winters stumbled, her legs unsteady after hours confined to a chair, but Hawkins supported her weight, urging her forward. "The fence is ahead," Rodriguez called out, gesturing toward the opening they'd created earlier. As they neared their escape route, headlights suddenly illuminated the area as a vehicle rounded the corner of the storage facility. Hawkins recognized the black SUV as similar to those Thompson's men had used at Aberdeen. "Change of plan," he decided instantly. "We take their vehicle." Without waiting for acknowledgement, he altered course, leading them toward a narrow passage between storage buildings. The SUV's driver spotted them, accelerating to cut off their escape, but misjudged the turning radius on the wet pavement. The vehicle skidded sideways, its rear end colliding with the corner of a storage unit. Rodriguez reacted instantly, sprinting toward the momentarily disabled vehicle. The driver was struggling with his airbag when Rodriguez reached the door, yanking it open and forcibly extracting the dazed man. A quick strike to the solar plexus ensured he wouldn't immediately pursue them. "Captain!" Rodriguez called, sliding into the driver's seat. "Let's go!" Hawkins helped Winters into the back seat before taking the passenger position beside Rodriguez. The sergeant had already hot-wired the ignition, the engine roaring to life as Thompson and his remaining men emerged from the storage maze, weapons drawn. Rodriguez stomped the accelerator, the SUV's tires spinning on the wet pavement before finding purchase. They shot forward, bullets pinging off the vehicle's rear quarter panels as Thompson's men opened fire. "Armored," Rodriguez noted with grim satisfaction. "They came prepared for trouble." "So did we," Hawkins replied, turning to check on Winters in the back seat. "Lieutenant, are you injured?" "Nothing serious," she assured him, though her voice was strained. "Some bruises, maybe a cracked rib." They were careful not to leave obvious marks. Hawkins felt another surge of anger at her mistreatment. "Did they get any information from you about the evidence?" "No," she replied firmly. "It's still secure, hidden where they'll never find it." "Where exactly?" Hawkins asked as Rodriguez navigated through the industrial park, putting distance between them and their pursuers. "Multiple locations," Winters explained. "Digital copies on encrypted drives in 3 separate secure servers, accessible only with authentication codes known to me. Physical copies with my cousin, a JAG officer stationed at Quantico." Thompson's men were so focused on finding a single cache of evidence, they never considered I might have distributed it. "Smart thinking," Rodriguez commended her. "Always have redundant exfil plans." "My father taught me that," she replied with a wan smile. "Always prepare for the worst while hoping for the best." Rodriguez checked the rearview mirror. "Speaking of the worst, we've got company. Black sedan, 2 vehicles back." Hawkins twisted to confirm Rodriguez's observation. "Thompson's not giving up easily." "He can't afford to," Winters noted. "If our evidence reaches General Marshall, Thompson faces criminal charges, not just for assaulting military officers, but for fraud, bribery, and reckless endangerment." "Then we make sure it reaches Marshall," Hawkins stated firmly. "Rodriguez, head for Fort Belvoir. We'll be safer on a military installation." "Roger that." As Rodriguez accelerated toward the highway, their pursuit vehicle closed the distance. Hawkins noted at least 2 occupants, their features indistinct through the rain-streaked windows. "They're gaining," he warned, "and they know where we're headed." Rodriguez nodded grimly. Time for evasive maneuvers. He abruptly cut across 3 lanes of traffic, ignoring the chorus of horns from startled drivers, and took an exit ramp at speed. The SUV rocked dangerously as it rounded the tight curve, tires screeching in protest. Their pursuers attempted to follow, but were blocked by a delivery truck that Rodriguez had deftly cut in front of. By the time the sedan made the exit, Rodriguez had already turned onto a side street, accelerating into the labyrinth of suburban Washington. "We lost them temporarily," he reported, "but they'll recover. We need a new destination." Hawkins considered their options. Fort Belvoir was still the safest location, but with Thompson's men in pursuit, reaching it without endangering other drivers or civilians would be challenging. They needed somewhere closer, somewhere secure enough to regroup and contact reinforcements. The Pentagon, he decided. Weekend security will be minimal, but still present. Thompson's men won't risk an armed confrontation on Department of Defense property. "My access credentials were revoked," Winters reminded him. "Mine weren't," Rodriguez countered. "Grayson doesn't have authority over Advanced Gunnery Training Division personnel. My credentials should still work." They altered course, heading toward the Pentagon while continuously checking for signs of pursuit. The rain continued unabated, reducing visibility but providing welcome concealment as they navigated the congested Washington streets. "Once we're inside, we contact Colonel Jenkins," Hawkins outlined his plan. "He has direct access to General Marshall, even in Europe. We present our evidence and request immediate intervention." "And if Jenkins is part of Grayson's circle," Winters asked pragmatically, "we could be walking into another trap." "Jenkins served with my father in Desert Storm," Rodriguez interjected. "He's old school, Lieutenant. Duty and honor before politics. If we show him hard evidence of Thompson's corruption, he'll act." They approached the Pentagon South parking area, Rodriguez slowing to a normal speed to avoid attracting attention. Security at the vehicle checkpoint was indeed minimal. A single guard manning the booth with a bored expression that shifted to alert professionalism as they approached. Identification, he requested as Rodriguez lowered the window. Master Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez, Advanced Gunnery Training Division, Rodriguez replied, presenting his credentials. Accompanying me are Captain James Hawkins and Lieutenant Sarah Winters. We're here on urgent business related to the Sentinel project. The guard examined Rodriguez's credentials carefully before checking a computer terminal in his booth. Captain Hawkins' access has been revoked by Colonel William Grayson. I can't allow him entry without authorization. Rodriguez maintained his composure. Contact Colonel Richard Jenkins, General Marshal's executive officer. He'll verify our authorization. The guard hesitated, clearly weighing the inconvenience of disturbing a senior officer on a weekend against the potential consequences of admitting personnel with revoked access. Please, it's a matter of national security, Winters added, leaning forward so the guard could see her bruised face. We have evidence of corruption within the Sentinel program that General Marshall needs to see immediately. Whether it was Winters' visible injuries or the mention of corruption that decided him, the guard nodded and picked up his phone. Wait here, I'll contact Colonel Jenkins. As the guard spoke quietly into his phone, Hawkins scanned the area for signs of Thompson's men. The south parking lot remained quiet, only a handful of vehicles present on the weekend evening. Jenkins is in his office, the guard reported after completing his call. He's authorized your entry, but wants you to report to him directly. Take visitor badges and proceed to Office E3456. Thank you, Rodriguez acknowledged, accepting the temporary badges for Hawkins and Winters. They parked the SUV in a visitor space near the entrance, hurrying through the rain to the security doors. Inside, the Pentagon's quarters were eerily quiet compared to weekday operations, their footsteps echoing on the polished floors. E-ring, third floor. Hawkins interpreted the office designation as they navigated the building's concentric layout. Executive territory. They rode an elevator in tense silence, each absorbed in private thoughts about the confrontation to come. As they exited on the third floor, Hawkins noticed Winters wincing slightly, one arm pressed against her side where Thompson's men had apparently focused their persuasive techniques. You need medical attention, he observed quietly. Later, she replied firmly. Let's finish this first. Colonel Jenkins' office was located near the Secretary of Defense's suite, reflecting his position as General Marshall's direct representative. The door was open when they arrived, revealing a compact but elegantly appointed space dominated by a large desk. Colonel Richard Jenkins rose as they entered, his weathered face registering surprise at Winters' condition. Lieutenant, are you all right? I've been better, sir, she admitted, but I'm functional. Jenkins gestured for them to sit. The guard mentioned something about corruption in the Sentinel program. I assume that's connected to your current state? Yes, sir, Hawkins confirmed. Lieutenant Winters was abducted and assaulted by contractors working for Raymond Thompson, the CEO of Velocity Dynamics. They were attempting to suppress evidence of critical design flaws in the Sentinel tank. Jenkins' expression hardened. That's a serious allegation, Captain. I understand General Marshall assigned you to evaluate the Sentinel project, but Colonel Grayson informs me you've been relieved of that duty. Colonel Grayson is complicit in concealing test results that prove Sentinel's armor is dangerously inadequate against modern anti-tank weapons. Hawkins stated bluntly. We have conclusive evidence, sir. Evidence that Thompson's men were willing to commit multiple felonies to suppress. Where is this evidence? Winters leaned forward. Secured in multiple locations, sir. I can access the digital copies immediately if you provide a secure terminal. Jenkins studied them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You realize what you're alleging could end multiple careers and potentially delay a critical defense program by months, if not years? We do, sir, Rodriguez affirmed, but the alternative is sending American soldiers into combat with inadequate protection. As General Marshall's representative, you have a duty to examine our evidence before dismissing our claims. The appeal to duty struck home. Jenkins nodded slowly. Very well. Use my secure terminal, Lieutenant. Show me what you found. Winters moved to the computer, entering a complex series of authentication codes to access her hidden files. As the evidence appeared on screen, she narrated the findings methodically, explaining the test procedures and results with scientific precision. Jenkins listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave as the presentation continued. When Winters concluded, he sat in silence for several moments, processing the implications. This is definitive, he acknowledged finally. The current armor configuration clearly fails against threats it's likely to face in combat. and Lieutenant Winter's alternative design appears to address the vulnerability without significant weight or production penalties. That's our assessment as well, sir, Hawkins confirmed. The question is, what happens now? Jenkins checked his watch. General Marshall is currently in meetings with NATO officials in Brussels. He'll be unreachable for at least the next 6 hours. In his absence, I have limited authority to act on this information. Sir, Thompson's men are still looking for us, Rodriguez pointed out. They've already demonstrated a willingness to use violence to suppress this evidence. And Colonel Grayson has effectively removed us from the Sentinel project, Hawkins added. We have no official standing to present these findings through normal channels. Jenkins considered their predicament, military pragmatism evident in his rapid assessment. Here's what we'll do. First, Lieutenant Winters needs medical attention. I'll arrange for a security detail to escort her to Walter Reed Army Medical Center, where she'll remain under protection until General Marshall returns. Winters began to object, but Jenkins raised a hand to forestall her protest. This isn't negotiable, Lieutenant. You've done your duty in securing and presenting this evidence. Now you need to document your injuries as part of the official record against Thompson. Recognizing the strategic wisdom in Jenkins' approach, Winters nodded reluctantly. Yes, sir. Meanwhile, Jenkins continued, I'll secure copies of this evidence in General Marshall's personal safe, where neither Grayson nor Thompson can access or alter it. I'll also initiate preliminary inquiries into Thompson's activities through channels outside the Sentinel program's authority. And us, sir? Hawkins asked, indicating himself and Rodriguez. You'll remain here at the Pentagon under my direct authority until General Marshall returns. I'm temporarily assigning you to my staff to ensure your safety and availability when the general is ready to address this situation. The colonel's decisive action was reassuring, providing a clear path forward that protected both the evidence and the whistleblowers who had risked their careers to expose the truth. As Jenkins made the necessary calls to arrange for Winter's security detail and medical transport, Hawkins felt the tension of the past days beginning to ease slightly. Thank you, Colonel, he said quietly as Jenkins completed his arrangements. Not every officer would have listened, given the political implications. Jenkins' expression was solemn. I served with your father, Rodriguez. He died because of shortcuts taken in armor development during the Gulf War. I won't be party to history repeating itself. My father would appreciate that, sir, Rodriguez replied, emotion briefly overwhelming his professional demeanor. A knock at the door announced the arrival of the security detail for Winters. 2 military police officers entered, their bearing crisp and professional, as Jenkins briefed them on their assignment. Lieutenant Winters is a material witness in an ongoing investigation, he informed them. She is to be escorted to Walter Reed Medical Center and remain under your protection until relieved by myself or General Marshall personally. No other authority supersedes this directive. Understood, sir, the senior MP acknowledged. We'll ensure her safety. As Winters prepared to depart with her escorts, she turned to Hawkins and Rodriguez. Thank you both, she said simply, for believing in me and for risking everything to make this right. Your father would be proud, Hawkins told her, the words inadequate to express the respect he felt for her courage and determination. After Winters departed with her security detail, Jenkins returned to his desk, his expression shifting from operational efficiency to deeper concern. There's something you should both know, he said, lowering his voice despite the privacy of his office. The Sentinel program has connections that extend beyond the Department of Defense. Thompson's company is financially linked to several members of Congress and at least 2 senior Pentagon officials. We suspected as much, Hawkins acknowledged. The pressure to maintain the production schedule despite known vulnerabilities had to be coming from somewhere. When General Marshall returns and reviews this evidence, there will be significant political blowback, Jenkins warned. Careers will end. Contracts worth billions will be re-examined. The pushback will be substantial and potentially dangerous. Are you suggesting we should back down, sir? Rodriguez asked, an edge of challenge in his voice. Quite the opposite, Sergeant, Jenkins replied firmly. I'm suggesting you both need to be prepared for what comes next. This won't end neatly with a revised armor design and a few reprimands. You've uncovered systemic corruption that some very powerful people will fight to conceal. We understand the risks, Colonel, Hawkins assured him. We accepted them the moment we decided to conduct those unauthorized tests. Good, Jenkins nodded approvingly, because I suspect General Marshall will need loyal officers he can trust to see this through to its conclusion. The battle for Sentinel's future is just beginning. The remainder of the evening passed in relative calm, Jenkins arranging secure quarters within the Pentagon, where Hawkins and Rodriguez could rest while remaining under protection. Regular updates confirmed that Winters had reached Walter Reed safely and was receiving treatment for her injuries, which included 2 cracked ribs and significant bruising, but nothing life-threatening. In the early hours of Sunday morning, however, the situation escalated dramatically. Jenkins arrived at their quarters, his expression grim. "We have a problem," he announced without preamble. "Thompson is dead." "Dead?" Hawkins repeated, instantly alert despite the early hour. "How?" "Apparent suicide, according to the initial police report. He was found in his home office with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. A suicide note was recovered, allegedly confessing to corporate fraud and bribery related to defense contracts." "That's convenient," Rodriguez observed skeptically. "Too convenient." "My thoughts exactly," Jenkins agreed, "especially since the note reportedly claims sole responsibility for the armor design compromises, explicitly exonerating Colonel Grayson and other Pentagon officials." Hawkins processed this development, recognizing its strategic implications. They're cutting their losses, sacrificing Thompson to protect the broader network of corruption, and creating a narrative that makes our evidence seem less significant, Jenkins added. "If Thompson has already confessed and paid the ultimate price, why pursue further investigations that might embarrass the department or delay a critical defense program?" "Because American lives are still at stake," Hawkins replied firmly. "Thompson's death doesn't change the fact that Sentinel's armor is dangerously inadequate. And it doesn't erase his assault on Lieutenant Winters or the attempted suppression of evidence," Rodriguez pointed out. "If anything, it confirms the seriousness of what we've uncovered." Jenkins nodded agreement. "General Marshall needs to know all of this immediately. I've requested an emergency secure call with him, scheduled for 0700. He'll want to hear directly from both of you." The call with General Marshall was brief but decisive. After reviewing the evidence and hearing firsthand accounts from Hawkins and Rodriguez, the general authorized immediate action on multiple fronts. "Colonel Jenkins, initiate a formal investigation into Thompson's death," Marshall ordered. "I want military investigators involved, not just local police. If this was staged to create a convenient narrative, I want to know." "Yes, sir." "Captain Hawkins, you're reinstated as Special Advisor to the Sentinel project, effective immediately. Your new mandate is to oversee the implementation of Lieutenant Winters' armor modifications for all production models." "Thank you, sir," Hawkins acknowledged, "but Colonel Grayson will resist any design changes at this stage." "Colonel Grayson has been temporarily relieved pending investigation," Marshall informed them, his tone leaving no room for debate. "I'm appointing Colonel Jenkins as interim project director until a permanent replacement can be vetted." The general's decisiveness was reassuring, demonstrating the leadership that had earned him the respect of officers throughout the military hierarchy. His final instructions, however, revealed his understanding of the political realities they still faced. "Gentlemen, be prepared for significant resistance from both industry and political quarters. The financial and political investments in Sentinel are substantial. Some will argue that delaying production to implement these modifications is an overreaction, especially with Thompson conveniently taking responsibility and removing himself from the equation." "How do you suggest we handle that resistance, sir?" Jenkins inquired. "With absolute transparency," Marshall replied firmly. "Every test result, every design modification, every production impact assessment will be documented meticulously and made available to the appropriate oversight committees. We'll control the narrative with facts, not convenient fictions." After the call concluded, Hawkins found himself reinvigorated despite the challenges ahead. For the first time since joining the Sentinel project, he felt they had a genuine chance to correct its course, to ensure the tank would provide the protection American soldiers deserved. "What's our first move, Captain?" Rodriguez asked as they prepared to leave Jenkins' office. "We check on Lieutenant Winters," Hawkins replied without hesitation. "Then we start implementing her armor design immediately before anyone can mount effective opposition." At Walter Reed Medical Center, they found Winters resting comfortably under the watchful eyes of her military police escorts. Though still bearing the visible marks of her ordeal, her spirit remained unbroken. "Captain Hawkins," she greeted him with a tired smile. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I hear congratulations are in order. General Marshall has seen reason." "Thanks to your evidence and alternative design," Hawkins acknowledged, "the general has authorized immediate implementation of your armor modifications. You'll be overseeing the process as soon as doctors clear you for duty." Pride and satisfaction flickered across her features. "My father would be pleased." "He'd be more than pleased, Lieutenant," Rodriguez told her warmly. "He'd be damn proud. You've accomplished what he died trying to protect. ensuring American tank crews have the best possible protection on the battlefield. We all did, she corrected him. None of us could have succeeded alone. Hawkins nodded agreement, reflecting on the unlikely alliance they'd formed and the obstacles they'd overcome together. A veteran tank commander nearing retirement, a brilliant young engineer carrying her father's legacy, and a seasoned gunner who understood the human cost of technical compromises. Together, they had challenged a system that prioritized politics and profit over protection. The battle isn't over, he cautioned. Thompson's death will be used to argue that the problem has been solved, that no further action is needed. Let them argue, Winters replied confidently. The evidence speaks for itself. No amount of political maneuvering can change the physics of armor penetration or the reality of our test results. And we have General Marshall's support now, Rodriguez added. That counts for a lot in Pentagon politics. The following weeks proved both challenging and rewarding as they worked to implement Winter's armor modifications. As expected, resistance emerged from multiple quarters. Defense contractors concerned about profit margins, politicians worried about job losses in their districts, and military bureaucrats reluctant to acknowledge that they had nearly fielded a dangerously flawed weapon system. Through it all, Hawkins maintained unwavering focus on a single metric: crew survivability. Every decision, every compromise, every technical adjustment was evaluated against this standard. If it improved protection for the soldiers who would ultimately crew Sentinel tanks in combat, he supported it. If it degraded protection for the sake of schedule, cost, or political expediency, he opposed it with the full authority General Marshall had granted him. 6 months later, as the first production model of the enhanced Sentinel rolled off the assembly line at the Lima Army Tank Plant in Ohio, Hawkins stood beside Lieutenant Winters and Sergeant Rodriguez, watching with profound satisfaction as General Marshall inspected the vehicle. Impressive work, the general acknowledged, running his hand along the redesigned turret armor. The production delay was minimal, the cost increase negligible, and according to the test results, crew survivability has improved by over 60%. Lieutenant Winters deserves most of the credit, sir, Hawkins replied honestly. Her engineering insight made this possible. Winters shook her head slightly. It was a team effort, General. Captain Hawkins provided the operational perspective that guided the design priorities. Sergeant Rodriguez contributed invaluable insights from a gunner's perspective. And you, sir, provided the political protection we needed to see it through. Marshall nodded, acknowledging the truth in her assessment. Sometimes doing the right thing requires more than individual courage or technical expertise. It requires the right people in the right positions, working together toward a common purpose. As the general moved on to speak with production officials, Rodriguez glanced at the nameplate affixed to the tank's hull. Winter's Thunder. Nice touch, he commented. Your father would approve. It wasn't my idea, Winters admitted, glancing at Hawkins. The captain arranged it as a surprise. Hawkins shrugged modestly. Every tank needs a name. This one honors 2 generations of Winters who ensured American tank crews had the protection they deserved. As they watched the Sentinel undergo final inspections before its formal acceptance into Army inventory, Hawkins reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a routine assignment had evolved into something far more significant. A battle not against a foreign adversary, but against a system that sometimes lost sight of its fundamental purpose. The investigation into Thompson's death had eventually concluded that it was indeed suicide, though motivated not by remorse but by fear of the criminal charges and public disgrace that awaited him. Colonel Grayson had been permanently removed from weapons development programs, reassigned to a logistics position where his administrative skills could be utilized without impacting soldier safety. Most importantly, the Sentinel program had been transformed from a potential disaster into a genuine advancement in American armored warfare. The tanks now entering service would provide their crews with the protection they needed to survive on modern battlefields, fulfilling the promise that had been compromised for the sake of political and financial expediency. What's next for you, Captain? Winters asked as they prepared to depart the production facility. Back to Fort Knox and training the next generation of tank commanders? Hawkins shook his head. General Marshall has asked me to stay on as part of a new oversight committee. We'll be evaluating all major combat vehicle programs to ensure they meet realistic battlefield requirements, not just paper specifications. Sounds like the perfect role for you, she observed. And you, Sergeant Rodriguez? I'll be joining the captain on that committee, Rodriguez replied with satisfaction. Someone needs to represent the enlisted perspective. Make sure the brass remembers who actually operates these vehicles in combat. And you, Lieutenant? Hawkins inquired. I understand you've received several attractive offers from both military research programs and civilian defense contractors. Winters smiled, a hint of her father's determination visible in her expression. I'm staying with Sentinel for now. There's still work to be done on the next generation of armor composites. After that, we'll see. As they walked together toward the waiting transport, Hawkins felt a sense of completion that had eluded him since Desert Storm. The Thunder Charger and its crew would never return, nor would Sergeant Winters and the other good soldiers lost in that distant conflict. But their sacrifices had not been forgotten or rendered meaningless. Through the persistence and courage of a new generation, represented by Lieutenant Winters, combined with the hard-won wisdom of veterans like himself and Rodriguez, the lessons of the past had finally been honored. American soldiers would face future battles with better protection because a small group of dedicated individuals had refused to accept that politics and profit should trump the safety of those who served. In the end, that was all any soldier could ask for. The knowledge that those at home, those making the decisions and building the equipment, cared enough to get it right, to put protection above politics and honor above expediency. For James Hawkins, veteran of Desert Storm and guardian of the next generation of American tank crews, it was enough, more than enough.